You can't grow new brain cells. For years, scientists believed and taught. Sobering idea, you're born with all the brain cells you'll ever have. Once they die, they're gone for good. It sounded final, fixed, a biological countdown. But modern neuroscience has rewritten the script. You can grow new brain cells, even as an adult. This process is called neurogenesis, and it happens in specific regions of the brain. Most notably the hippocampus, the area involved in learning, memory, and emotion. For a long time, we assumed neurogenesis stopped shortly after birth. But in the 1990s, groundbreaking research showed new neurons forming in adult rats, and later studies confirmed similar activity in humans. Since then, scientists have found evidence of adult neurogenesis in people of various ages, though it's still an area of active research and debate. Here's the even cooler part. Certain behaviors may encourage neurogenesis. Things like physical exercise, especially aerobic activities like running, quality sleep, which supports memory and brain repair, mental stimulation, like learning new skills or exploring new environments, social interaction, and even mindfulness practices. That said, not all brain regions regenerate equally, and damage from disease, injury, or drug abuse can be long-lasting. But the old myth, that the brain is static, shrinking day by day, just isn't true anymore. Your brain is more adaptable than we once imagined. It's not just aging, it's responding, rewiring, and yes, sometimes regrowing. So if you've ever said, "I'm too old to learn," your hippocampus would like a word. You only use 10% of your brain. It's the kind of fact that shows up in motivational posters, sci-fi movies, and late-night TED Talk rabbit holes. Humans only use 10% of their brain. The rest, apparently, just sitting there like empty attic space, waiting to unlock telepathy, super memory, or maybe piano skills. But here's the twist. It's completely false. Neuroscientists have been trying to kill this myth for decades. Modern brain imaging, from fMRIs to PET scans, shows that we use virtually every part of our brain, and we use most of it almost all the time. Even when you're resting, there's constant activity across your cortex, brainstem, and limbic system. There is no silent 90%. In fact, if 90% of your brain weren't functioning, you'd be in serious trouble, not writing novels or discovering hidden powers, but likely in a coma, or worse. So where did the myth come from? Possibly a misquote. Early 20th century psychologist William James once said, "We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources." Inspirational, sure, but it's about potential, not anatomy. Somewhere along the way, it got twisted into a seductive fact, and it's stuck because it feels good. It makes us believe we're untapped geniuses, just a meditation session away from greatness. But here's the truth. You're already using 100% of the hardware. The real question is how well you're training the software. Think of your brain not like a dusty mansion with locked rooms, but more like a city, alive, buzzing, always in use. It's not about waking up some dormant area. It's about how you connect the parts you already have. So, if you're still hoping to unlock psychic powers by thinking harder, well, you might need a different app for that. Eating burnt toast causes cancer. Most of us have heard it. Don't eat burnt toast. It causes cancer. It sounds like one of those warnings passed down at the breakfast table, nestled between chew slowly and don't talk with your mouth full. But is it true? This fear traces back to a chemical called acrylamide, a byproduct that forms when starchy foods are cooked at high temperatures. In 2002, Swedish scientists discovered high levels of acrylamide in common foods like fries, chips, and yes, burnt toast. And suddenly, headlines around the world screamed, "Cancer in your kitchen." But here's what most of those headlines skipped. In laboratory studies, acrylamide did cause cancer in rats, but only when given doses up to 1,000 times higher than what humans normally consume. According to the World Health Organization, evidence for acrylamide being carcinogenic in humans is limited and inconclusive. The UK Food Standards Agency even clarified, while it's wise to reduce exposure, There's no direct link proving that burnt toast causes cancer in real-world conditions. In fact, some scientists argue that our bodies are pretty resilient. Our livers metabolize small amounts of acrylamide efficiently. One study from the National Cancer Institute followed over 100,000 people and found no consistent link between dietary acrylamide and increased cancer risk. But here's the twist. While everyone's worried about a crispy corner of toast, we often ignore actual cancer risks on the table, like processed meats, alcohol, or even excess body weight, all of which have far stronger, well-documented links to cancer than your toaster ever will. So, next time you're tempted to panic over a slightly burnt slice, consider this: science doesn't say, don't eat toast. It says, don't live in fear of it. The real threat isn't what's on your plate, it's how we fixate on the wrong dangers. Sometimes burnt toast is just toast. Cracking your knuckles will give you arthritis. Crack, that little sound. It drives some people crazy. Annoyed glances, wrinkled noses. Stop that. You'll get arthritis. It's a line so common, it's practically law in some households. But is there any truth to it? Surprisingly, the answer is no. Cracking your knuckles does not cause arthritis, and we've got the science to back it. The cracking sound isn't your bones grinding or your joints falling apart. It's caused by gas bubbles rapidly forming and collapsing in the synovial fluid, the lubricant inside your joints. It's like the champagne fizz of your fingers. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. Still skeptical? Enter Dr. Donald Unger, a medical doctor who conducted a 60-year self-experiment. He cracked the knuckles of his left hand at least twice a day, every day. The right hand, he left it alone. After 6 decades, he found no difference in arthritis between the two hands. And for this work, he won an Ig Nobel Prize, honoring research that makes you laugh, then think. But what about real science? Studies in the journal Annals of the Rheumatic Diseases and the Journal of the American Board of Family Medicine both concluded no strong correlation between knuckle cracking and arthritis. You might annoy the people around you, maybe even yourself, but your joints? They're probably fine. In fact, some early research suggests that regular joint movement might even help keep them limber. As long as there's no pain or swelling, it's harmless. Ironically, the real contributors to arthritis aren't the things we obsess over, like knuckle cracking, but factors like age, genetics, joint injuries, obesity, and repetitive strain. So next time someone gives you the stink eye for cracking your knuckles, feel free to politely inform them, science is on my side. And if they still complain, well, maybe it's not your joints that need adjusting. Time zones were created to match sunrise. Time feels natural, like it flows with the sun, and always has. So it makes sense to believe time zones were created to follow the sunrise, to keep noon aligned with the sun overhead. But here's the truth. Time zones were created to standardize train schedules, not to honor the sun. Before the 19th century, every town used its own local time, set by the position of the sun in the sky. Noon in one city might be several minutes different from noon in the next town over. It worked until trains arrived. Railroads needed synchronized time to avoid collisions and confusion. In the United States, the railroad companies themselves proposed 4 standard time zones in 1883. The government later adopted the system officially. Other countries followed with similar standardizations. It wasn't about matching sunrise. It was about efficiency, coordination, and safety. As a result, many time zones today don't perfectly align with the sun's path. Some regions are offset by 30 or even 45 minutes. Some large countries, like China, use a single time zone across thousands of kilometers. So no, time zones weren't built around nature. They were built around the machine age. Sunrise lost to schedules, and time became something humans decided. Left-handed people die young. It's a claim that sounds scientific and unsettling. Left-handed people die younger than right-handed people. Some say by 9 years, others say even more. But here's the truth. This myth is based on flawed research, and it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The idea comes mainly from a 1991 study that looked at death certificates in California. The researchers noted whether someone was left or right-handed and found that left-handed people, on average, had died younger. The conclusion? Lefties must have shorter lifespans. But here's what they missed. For much of the 20th century, and long before, left-handedness was discouraged, even punished. Children were often forced to use their right hands in school. As a result, older generations were underrepresented as left-handed, not because they died young, but because they'd been retrained to use their right hand and officially recorded that way. So when researchers looked at older people, they saw more right-handers, and when they looked at younger people, they saw more left-handers. That made it seem like left-handed people didn't live as long, but it was really a generational labeling error, not a biological truth. More recent and better designed studies show no difference in lifespan between left-handed and right-handed people. Left-handedness is simply a variation in brain wiring. It's associated with some risks, like more workplace injuries in right-handed designed environments, but also with some advantages, like sports performance or creativity in certain fields. So no, being left-handed doesn't doom you to a shorter life. That idea is a myth, built on a statistical mirage. And if anything, being a lefty just means you're in the unique 10% of the world that sees everything from a slightly different angle. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain, from base to summit. Everyone knows Mount Everest as the king of mountains. It's the tallest in the world, or so we're taught. But here's the twist. Everest is the highest point above sea level, but not the tallest mountain from base to summit. Let's break that down. Mount Everest stands at about 848 meters, or 29 feet above sea level. No mountain reaches a higher altitude, but when measuring from base to peak, Everest doesn't take the crown. That title belongs to Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano in Hawaii. Mauna Kea rises about 4,205 meters above sea level, far less than Everest. But the majority of Mauna Kea is underwater. From its base on the ocean floor to its summit, it measures over 10,000 meters, or 33,500 feet, making it taller than Everest by more than a kilometer. So why does Everest get all the fame? Because altitude matters to climbers. Everest's summit reaches the highest elevation on Earth, where oxygen levels drop dangerously low, and survival depends on extreme training, gear, and acclimatization. It's also visible, dramatic, and symbolic, which makes it a cultural icon. But if you're measuring pure height, from the bottom of the mountain to the top, Mauna Kea wins. So Everest may touch the sky, but Mauna Kea rises from the sea, quietly, holding a taller truth. Goldfish have a 3-second memory. Poor goldfish. For years, they've been the universal symbol of forgetfulness. You've got the memory of a goldfish, people say, meaning you can't remember anything past lunch. The legend? Goldfish can only remember things for 3 seconds. But science says otherwise. And honestly, we owe the goldfish an apology. In reality, goldfish have a memory span that lasts weeks, sometimes even months. In one study from Plymouth University, researchers trained goldfish to press a lever to receive food. Even after the lever was removed for over a week, the goldfish remembered how to use it when it came back. That's a far cry from 3 seconds. In another experiment, goldfish were trained to associate a specific sound with feeding time. Weeks later, they still responded to the sound, swimming over, expecting food. Just like Pavlov's dogs, but wetter, they can also recognize colors, navigate mazes, and even distinguish between different human faces, which is more than some people can say about co-workers. So, where did the myth come from? Most likely, it was just made up. A throwaway comment turned into a factoid, repeated so many times it became truth. It's catchy, simple, and convenient, especially when you're trying to excuse your own forgetfulness. But here's the twist. The myth says more about us than the fish. We love tidy facts that fit into tweets, even if they're wrong. We underestimate the intelligence of the creatures around us, because it's easier than admitting we might not be the smartest species in the room. So the next time someone calls you a goldfish, maybe say thank you. They're smarter than you think. And they never ask to be your metaphor. Sugar makes kids hyperactive. It's the party rule every parent knows. Give kids sugar and brace for chaos. The cupcakes come out. The frosting hits their veins. And suddenly, the room turns into a zoo. Jumping, yelling, laughter on fast forward. It's the sugar, they say. But here's the thing. Study after study has shown sugar doesn't actually make kids hyperactive. This belief has been around since the 1970s, when a pediatrician named Dr. Benjamin Feingold proposed that artificial food additives and sugars could cause behavioral problems. It was a compelling idea, and it stuck, but the science didn't back it. In one well-known double-blind study, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers gave groups of children sugar, artificial sweeteners, or placebos, and found no significant difference in behavior between them. Still not convinced? Another study in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology tested a sneaky trick. They told mothers their kids had just consumed a sugary drink, but they hadn't. The result? Those moms rated their kids as more hyperactive, even though there was no actual sugar involved. What changed? Not the children, but the expectation of the parents. That's the real twist. The sugar hyperactivity myth survives, not because it's biologically true, but because it feels true. A loud, chaotic room of kids after cake. It's easier to blame the frosting than the environment, the excitement, the sleep deprivation, or just being, well, a kid. Now, does that mean sugar is innocent? Not quite. It still contributes to obesity, insulin resistance, and other health issues when overconsumed. But hyperactivity, not sugar's crime. So next time someone blames a cookie for a kid's energy, you might gently remind them, it's not the cookie, it's the context. You'll catch a cold if you go out with wet hair. Your mum probably said it. Your grandma definitely said it. Don't go out with wet hair. You'll catch a cold. And so you stood there, hair dripping, feeling like a walking health hazard. But let's get one thing clear. You don't catch a cold from cold air or wet hair. Colds are caused by viruses, not temperature. Specifically, rhinoviruses and coronaviruses, and they spread through airborne droplets, handshakes, and shared surfaces, not through moisture on your scalp. In fact, in one controlled study published in the journal Clinical Infectious Diseases, researchers exposed two groups to cold viruses. One group was kept warm and dry, the other chilled and damp. The infection rates, nearly identical. Being cold didn't make people more likely to get sick. So, where does the myth come from? Part of it might be timing. Colds are more common in winter, which makes people associate chilly weather with illness. But it's not the temperature, it's human behavior. When it's cold outside, we huddle indoors, close windows, and share air, all perfect for virus transmission. There's also a small nuance. Some newer studies suggest that cold may slightly weaken immune responses in nasal passages, making it easier for a virus you've already caught to take hold. But, and this is key, you still need to be exposed to the virus first. So wet hair, at worst, it makes you uncomfortable. At best, it's just wet. If you're not already carrying a virus, you're not going to magic one into your body by stepping outside with damp bangs. Still, drying your hair before heading out? Not bad advice, just not because of science. Because comfort is its own kind of wisdom. Swallowed gum stays in your body for 7 years. You're chewing gum, minding your business, and then accidentally swallow it. Panic. You remember the warning, that gum's going to stay in your stomach for 7 years. 7 years, like it's signing a lease. But the truth, swallowed gum does not stick around for 7 years. It's just not that clingy. It's true that gum base, the chewy part, isn't fully digestible. Your body can't break it down, like it does with fruits or bread. But that doesn't mean it builds a secret fortress in your intestines. Your digestive system is smarter than that. What really happens is this. Your body moves the gum along, just like anything else it can't digest, like fiber, corn kernels, or that one Lego you swear you never ate. It passes through your stomach, your intestines, and eventually, well, you know where this ends. It's usually gone in a day or two. The myth likely started as a way to scare kids into not swallowing gum, which, to be fair, isn't ideal. Swallowing gum too often, especially for small children, can lead to rare cases of intestinal blockage, but that's with large amounts, often mixed with other indigestibles. It's not about 7 years. It's about poor timing and volume. So no, your stomach isn't a sticky trap. It doesn't hoard gum like lost coins or guilt. If you accidentally swallow a piece, don't panic. Don't reach for a shovel. It'll come out the old-fashioned way. Just maybe stick to chewing. You need to drink 8 glasses of water a day. 8 easy glasses. That's the magic number. Right. From gym teachers to wellness blogs, the message is everywhere. You need to drink 8 glasses of water a day to stay healthy. But here's the twist. There's no solid scientific basis behind that number. The origin, it likely comes from a 1945 recommendation by the US Food and Nutrition Board. They suggested about 2.5 liters of water per day. But here's the part most people ignored. The original statement also said, most of this is contained in prepared foods. Yes, food, fruits, vegetables, soup, even rice. They all contain water. Your morning coffee, that counts too. So does juice. Even your broccoli is basically a crunchy water balloon. The idea that we need 8 separate glasses of plain water on top of all that. It's a myth that's stuck, partly because it's simple, and partly because bottled water companies had a real marketing moment. Now, is hydration important? Absolutely. But the human body is good at telling you what it needs. It's called thirst, and it works. Unless you're in a very specific situation, like heavy exercise, extreme heat, or certain medical conditions, you don't need to force water down constantly. In fact, overhydration can be dangerous. It dilutes sodium levels and can lead to a condition called hyponatremia, which is rare but serious. So, how much should you drink? Enough to not feel thirsty. Enough so your pee is light yellow. That's it. 8 glasses isn't harmful, but it's not gospel either. In the end, the real rule is simpler. Listen to your body. It's been managing fluids since before water bottles were trendy. Shaving makes hair grow back thicker. You shave your legs, or your face, or maybe just a stray patch on your arm. A few days later, the hair's back, and it feels darker, coarser, thicker. So the myth lives on. Shaving makes your hair grow back thicker. But does it? Nope. Shaving does not change the thickness, color, or growth rate of your hair. It just feels that way. And there's a surprisingly simple reason why. When you shave, you're cutting the hair at the surface of the skin, right where it's thickest. Hair naturally tapers at the end, like a soft point. But, after a shave, you're left with a blunt edge. It's like chopping a tree. The stump looks thicker than the tip. So when the hair starts growing back, it feels stubbly and coarse. It hasn't changed. You've just altered its shape. Also, the color may look darker, but that's just because it hasn't been exposed to sun or air yet. It hasn't had time to fade. It's like a fresh patch of grass after you mow, shorter and sharper looking, but not fundamentally different. Multiple studies, including those published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, have confirmed this. In controlled tests, shaved hair didn't grow faster, thicker, or darker than unshaved hair. So, why does the myth survive? Partly because of timing. People start shaving during puberty, the exact moment your hair actually does grow thicker due to hormones. Shaving and hair growth just happen to show up to the party at the same time, so we blame the razor. But your razor isn't magic. It's not turning baby fuzz into wire. It's just trimming what was already growing. So if you're worried about turning into a human cactus, don't. Shaving changes the surface, not the source. Lightning never strikes the same place, twice. You've probably heard it in movies, books, or dramatic conversations. Lightning never strikes the same place, twice. It sounds poetic, like nature's rule of fairness. Once sapped, you're safe. But in reality, lightning absolutely strikes the same place, again and again. In fact, some places get struck hundreds of times. The Empire State Building, for example, is hit by lightning about 20 to 25 times per year, not over a lifetime, every year. Why? Because it's tall, conductive, and it sticks out like a spark magnet. Same with radio towers, mountain peaks, and even trees in open fields. The idea that lightning won't return to the same spot is a comforting myth, but it has no basis in science. Lightning follows the path of least resistance, and if that path hasn't changed, it has no problem taking the same route twice. Even people have been struck multiple times. Take Roy Sullivan, a US park ranger who holds the world record for surviving lightning strikes. He was hit 7 separate times between 1942 and 1977. The odds are astronomical, but clearly not impossible. So why do we say it? Probably because it makes us feel safe. It's a phrase of reassurance, like, that won't happen again, or you've paid your dues. But nature doesn't care about fairness. It cares about physics. If conditions are right, elevation, humidity, electric potential, lightning will return to the scene, no matter how poetic the myths may be. So next time someone says lightning never strikes twice, just point to a skyscraper, or a forest, or Roy. And remember, sometimes, nature does repeat itself. Humans evolved from monkeys. It's the shortcut explanation everyone's heard. Humans evolved from monkeys, said with confidence, usually followed by a shrug or a joke about bananas. But scientifically, that's not quite right. Humans did not evolve from monkeys. We evolved alongside them, from a common ancestor. Let's rewind the evolutionary clock. Millions of years ago, there was a species that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite any modern monkey. It was something in between, a primate ancestor that eventually branched out. Some of its descendants evolved into today's monkeys. Others, over millions of years, evolved into apes, and eventually into hominins, the line that leads to us. So it's not a straight line, it's a family tree. Monkeys aren't our grandparents, they're our distant cousins. And we're not more evolved than they are either. We've all been evolving for the same amount of time, just in different directions. Monkeys adapted to their environments. We adapted to ours. Evolution doesn't have a finish line, it just keeps going. The confusion comes from how we simplify science into sound bites. Evolved from monkeys sounds neat and punchy, but it misses the complexity and the beauty of how evolution actually works. Here's a more accurate version. Humans and monkeys share a common ancestor that lived millions of years ago. Less catchy, maybe, but way more fascinating. So no, your great-great-great-grandparent wasn't a monkey swinging through trees. But if you go far enough back, you'll find something vaguely familiar, with eyes like yours and hands that could grip. Because the story of evolution isn't about replacement, it's about relation. Bats are blind. It's the stuff of bedtime stories and superhero metaphors. Bats are blind. You picture them fluttering through the night, crashing into walls, relying only on sound like little flying daredevils. But the truth, bats aren't blind at all. In fact, many of them can see quite well, some even better than humans. The myth probably comes from the fact that bats are nocturnal and often navigate using echolocation, a high-frequency sound system that lets them see with their ears. They emit ultrasonic calls and use the echoes that bounce back to map their surroundings with incredible precision. It's so sophisticated, they can detect something as thin as a human hair in total darkness. But echolocation doesn't replace sight, it complements it. Some species of bats, like fruit bats, also known as flying foxes, don't even use echolocation. They rely on excellent vision, including color vision, to spot fruit and flowers. In fact, their eyesight is adapted for low-light environments, much like cats. Researchers have even tested bat vision and found that many species can detect motion, shapes, and light sources, even in the dark. So they're not flying blind, they're just using multiple senses at once, something we humans often wish we could do. So where did the myth start? Probably because bats move so confidently in pitch black, people assumed they couldn't see, and because blind as a bat just sounds poetic. But the real story is this: bats are navigators of the night, using sound and sight to own the skies. They're not blind, they're just multitaskers. Next time you hear someone say blind as a bat, feel free to gently correct them, because if anyone's flying blind, it's probably us. Hair and nails keep growing after death. It's one of those eerie facts people love to share at sleepovers. Did you know your hair and nails keep growing after you die? Creepy, right? Like your body's still trying to live. Just a little. But scientifically, it's a myth. Your hair and nails do not continue to grow after death. Here's what's really happening. When you die, your body begins to dehydrate. The skin around your hair follicles and nail beds starts to shrink and retract. That makes the hair and nails appear longer, like they've continued to grow. But it's just an optical illusion. No growth is happening. Why? Because growth requires energy. It needs oxygen, circulation, cell division, all things that stop very quickly after death. Without blood flow and metabolic activity, your body has no fuel to keep building hair or pushing out nails. In fact, even in life, hair and nail growth is slow. Hair grows about ½ an inch per month. Nails, even slower. So the idea that, in death, your body would suddenly pick up the pace is more gothic fantasy than biology. The myth likely started with morticians and nurses who noticed the longer look during post-mortem care. And hey, it makes for a great spooky line in novels and horror films. But in truth, the only thing that keeps growing after death is the legend. Vaccines cause autism. It started with a headline and spread like wildfire. Vaccines cause autism, a phrase that launched fear, controversy, and a global wave of misinformation. But here's the truth. Vaccines do not cause autism, and science has been saying that for years. The myth traces back to a 1998 paper published in The Lancet by Dr. Andrew Wakefield. He claimed a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The media amplified it, parents panicked, and vaccination rates dropped. But what most people don't know is this: that study was small, poorly designed, and worst of all, fraudulent. Wakefield had undisclosed financial conflicts of interest and manipulated data. Eventually, his paper was retracted, and he was stripped of his medical license. It wasn't just bad science, it was deliberate deception. Since then, numerous large-scale studies involving hundreds of thousands of children have shown no link between vaccines and autism. Not one, no pattern, no cause, no connection. Organizations like the CDC, the World Health Organization, and the American Academy of Pediatrics all stand by this. Vaccines are safe. So why does the myth persist? Because it hits where we're most vulnerable, our children. Autism diagnoses often happen around the same age. Children receive vaccines. It's easy to confuse timing with cause, especially when emotions are involved. But here's the real danger. The myth has consequences. Diseases we once had under control, like measles, are making a comeback, all because of fear, not facts. So no, vaccines don't cause autism. They prevent suffering, they save lives, and sometimes, the scariest thing is how quickly a lie can spread when it wears the costume of concern. MSG is dangerous and unnatural. MSG. 3 letters that made an entire generation side-eye their takeout menus. MSG. No thanks, I don't want a headache. For years, monosodium glutamate was treated like a villain, hiding in your food. But here's the twist. MSG isn't dangerous, and it's not unnatural either. MSG is simply the sodium salt of glutamic acid, an amino acid found naturally in foods like tomatoes, cheese, mushrooms, and even breast milk. It enhances flavor by triggering umami, the savory taste we crave in ramen, soy sauce, or parmesan. The panic began in 1969, when a letter to the editor was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The writer claimed he experienced weakness and heart palpitations after eating Chinese food and blamed it on MSG. It was later dubbed Chinese restaurant syndrome. But the letter wasn't a formal study, and the science that followed, study after study, has failed to show any consistent link between MSG and negative symptoms in the general population. The FDA, the World Health Organization, and the European Food Safety Authority all agree. MSG is safe for consumption. Yes, a tiny portion of people may be sensitive to large doses, just like some are sensitive to caffeine or dairy. But for most people, it's just a flavor enhancer.
Nothing more. The real damage wasn't done by MSG itself, but by the myth. It fed into xenophobia, especially toward Asian cuisine, and created a stigma that lingered for decades. Meanwhile, the same people avoiding MSG were happily eating chips, canned soups, and fast food, which also contain MSG, just without the scary label. So next time someone says MSG is dangerous, maybe offer them a bowl of miso soup
with a sprinkle of truth on top. Touching frogs gives you warts. You're a kid, chasing frogs by the pond. Someone shouts, "Don't touch it. You'll get warts." Suddenly, the slimy little guy doesn't seem so harmless. But here's the truth. Touching frogs does not give you warts. Not even a little bit. Warts are caused by the human papillomavirus, HPV, a virus that spreads through direct contact with infected human skin, not frogs, toads, or any amphibian in your backyard. You can't catch a human virus from a frog because, well, they're not human. So where did the myth come from? Probably from those little bumps that some toads and frogs have on their skin. They look like warts, but they're actually part of the animal's natural texture, often used for camouflage or even storing mild toxins to ward off predators. They're not contagious, and they're not viral. But because the texture resembled human warts, and because folklore loves a weird detail, the connection stuck. Warts, frogs, must be related. Spoiler, they're not. If you get warts, chances are it came from touching another person's skin, or sharing things like towels or razors, not from catching a toad on a summer afternoon. And let's be honest, frogs have been through enough. First they had to deal with fairy tales, turning them into cursed princes. Then we blamed them for our skin problems. But if you're healthy, and you pick one up gently, you're fine. Just wash your hands afterward, because that's good advice for literally anything. The frog didn't curse you. It just wanted to hop away in peace. Bulls hate the color red. It's the classic image. A matador waves a red cape, and the bull charges in fury. It's the red that makes them angry, we're told. And just like that, bulls got a color problem. But here's the twist. Bulls are colorblind to red. Yes, bulls, like most cattle, are dichromatic. That means they see only two color channels, similar to red-green colorblindness in humans. Red simply looks like a shade of gray or brown to them. So it's not the color of the cape that sets them off. It's the movement. In bullfighting, the matador uses quick, sharp motions to provoke the bull, waving the cape back and forth, taunting and challenging. The bull charges at the motion, not the hue. If the cape were blue, yellow, or tie-dye, the reaction would be exactly the same. And here's another thing. In traditional Spanish bullfights, the matador actually uses different capes during different stages, and the red one is saved for the end. It's red not because of science, but because of aesthetics and practicality. Red hides bloodstains better. That's it. So why does the myth persist? Probably because it's visual and easy to remember. Red is dramatic. Red means danger. It fits the narrative we want to believe, that color alone can spark fury. But in truth, bulls aren't irrational color haters. They're reacting to what threatens them, not what shade it's dressed in. So next time someone says bulls hate red, you can tell them, red didn't make the bull charge. The show did. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. It's one of those did you know facts people love to toss around. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from space. Sounds epic, ancient, awe-inspiring. But there's one problem. It's not true. The Great Wall is long, over 13,000 miles, but it's also narrow and made of earth-colored materials that blend into the landscape. From low Earth orbit, where astronauts on the ISS circle the planet, it's incredibly hard to spot with the naked eye. In fact, many astronauts have said they couldn't see it at all without zoom lenses or ideal lighting conditions. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield was asked directly. His answer: sorry, it's not visible to the unaided eye from space. Other man-made objects, like city grids, airports, and highways, are actually much more visible because of their scale, contrast, and straight-line patterns. So where did this myth come from? It dates back to at least the early 20th century, long before we had space travel. Some writers guessed, based on the wall's size, that it could be seen from the moon. That guess somehow became accepted fact, repeated in textbooks, trivia games, and documentaries. But here's the irony. The wall is not the most visible object from space, and definitely not from the moon. From there, even continents blur. At that distance, everything human-made disappears. So no, the Great Wall isn't uniquely visible from orbit. But it's still a marvel, not for how far you can see it, but for how long it stood, built stone by stone, across mountains and deserts, and not to be seen from the stars, but to shape the story of Earth. Bananas grow on trees. You've seen it in cartoons, books, and maybe even your own backyard. A tall tree with a bunch of bananas hanging down. So it seems obvious, bananas grow on trees. Except they don't. Bananas grow on a plant, but it's not a tree. It just looks like one. Technically, the banana plant is the world's largest herbaceous flowering plant. That's right, herbaceous, like basil or mint, but supersized. What looks like a thick, sturdy tree trunk, it's actually called a pseudostem, made of tightly packed leaf bases. There's no wood, no bark, just leaves pretending to be a tree. That fake trunk supports a single flowering stem, which produces fruit once and then dies. Yes, the whole tree dies. After one cycle, the plant survives only because new shoots, called suckers, grow from the base and take its place. It's one of nature's greatest impersonations. So why does the myth persist? Because the banana plant walks, talks, and grows like a tree. It's tall, leafy, and grows fruit high off the ground. And let's be honest, banana tree rolls off the tongue better than gigantic herb. But technically, bananas don't grow on trees. They grow on a plant that's too dramatic to call itself a shrub and too leafy to be a tree. So next time you bite into a banana, remember, you're eating the fruit of a herb dressed in disguise. You lose most heat through your head. It's winter. You're bundled up in a coat, gloves, boots, but someone always says it. Make sure to wear a hat. You lose most of your body heat through your head. It sounds scientific, logical, but it's not quite true. The idea that you lose 40 to 80% of your body heat through your head comes from a misinterpreted military study in the 1950s. Soldiers were dressed in Arctic gear for cold weather testing, but with their heads exposed. Naturally, that's where most of the heat escaped. But had they left any other body part uncovered, legs, chest, arms, the result would have been the same. Heat escapes from wherever the insulation is weakest. In fact, more recent research, including studies published in BMJ and the Journal of Applied Physiology, shows that only about 7 to 10% of body heat is lost through the head under normal conditions, assuming the rest of your body is evenly covered. So the head heat myth. It's not that your head is a special heat chimney. It's just that, for most people, it's the only part left uncovered. No hat? Of course heat escapes from there. Now, does this mean you shouldn't wear a hat in the cold? Not at all. Your head still matters, especially since blood vessels in the scalp are close to the surface, and cold exposure there can impact overall body temperature. But the idea that your head is the primary exit point for heat, that's a cozy little myth. In the end, heat loss isn't about your head, it's about what's exposed. So wear a hat if it's cold, but don't think it's the only thing saving you. Your arms and legs would like some credit too. People in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. It's one of those comforting stories we like to tell ourselves. Back in the Dark Ages, people believed the Earth was flat, until brave explorers proved them wrong. But here's the truth. Most educated people in the Middle Ages knew the Earth was round. The idea that medieval folks thought otherwise is a myth. Ironically, a modern one. As early as the 6th century BCE, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and later Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth, using evidence like the curved shadow during lunar eclipses and the way ships disappear, bottom first, over the horizon. By the time of the Middle Ages, this idea was widespread in Europe's intellectual circles. Scholars, monks, and navigators understood the Earth was round. It was taught in medieval universities and featured in astronomy texts like Sacrobosco's Sphere, which was standard reading in the 13th century. Even Christopher Columbus wasn't trying to prove the Earth was round. He was arguing about the size of the planet, not its shape. Most experts of the time already knew it was a globe. They just correctly thought Asia was much farther away than Columbus believed. So where did the flat Earth myth come from? So, mostly from the 19th century, when some historians and writers wanted to paint the Middle Ages as ignorant and science-hating, to contrast with the rational, modern era. It was more of a narrative weapon than a historical truth. But the real irony, the flat Earth myth, became so widespread, we now falsely believe, others falsely believed it. So, no, people in the Middle Ages weren't walking around thinking they'd fall off the edge of the world. That misconception, it's modern. Alcohol warms you up. It's cold outside, your fingers are numb, and someone hands you a drink. Have a shot, it'll warm you up. And for a moment, it does. A comforting flush spreads through your body, and you feel toasty. But that warmth, it's a trick. Alcohol doesn't actually warm you up. It cools you down. Here's how it works. Alcohol causes your blood vessels to dilate, especially near the surface of your skin. That's why your cheeks get red, and why you feel that warm, fuzzy sensation. But at the same time, that surface-level dilation pulls heat away from your core, causing your internal body temperature to drop. In cold environments, this can be dangerous. Your body is losing heat faster, but because you feel warm, you don't notice it happening. It masks the warning signs of hypothermia, which makes alcohol particularly risky in freezing conditions. Studies, including one in the Journal of Wilderness Medicine, have shown that alcohol impairs your ability to regulate temperature and can reduce your natural shivering response. So instead of warming you, it actually lowers your defenses against the cold. This myth stuck around, partly because of how alcohol feels, not how it works. It gives you a false sense of heat, and people tend to believe their skin over science. That's why in old movies, you see characters stranded in the snow, sipping whiskey. But in real life, that's the worst idea you could have. So next time you're freezing, and someone offers you a drink to warm up, remember that heat is just an illusion. If you really want to stay warm, skip the shot, and grab a jacket instead. A penny dropped from a skyscraper can kill you. You've probably heard this one in a dramatic voice. If you drop a penny from the top of a skyscraper, it could kill someone. The idea is simple. A small object, falling far enough, becomes a deadly weapon. But here's the truth. A penny dropped from a skyscraper won't kill you. In fact, it probably wouldn't even break the skin. Let's talk physics. A penny is small, light, and not very aerodynamic. As it falls, air resistance quickly kicks in. It doesn't just keep accelerating forever. Instead, it reaches something called terminal velocity, the fastest speed it can fall through the air. For a penny, that's around 25 to 65 miles per hour, depending on how it tumbles. Fast? Sure. Lethal? Not really. Because of its flat shape, a penny tends to flutter or spin as it falls, like a leaf or a paper disc, and that slows it down even more. By the time it reaches the ground, it might sting if it hits you on the head, but it won't drive itself into your skull like some cartoon bullet. In fact, Mythbusters tested this. They dropped pennies from the Empire State Building using rigs that mimicked real fall conditions and found the coins barely left a mark. No fatalities, no forehead dents, just gravity with a little flair. So where did the myth come from? Probably from how dramatic it feels. Skyscrapers are tall, pennies are metal. Put them together, and our brains imagine a missile. But the real world has air, and air is a pretty good safety net. So if you're walking in a city and feel something small hit your head, don't worry, it's not an assassin with loose change. It's just gravity being gentle. If you touch a baby bird, its mother will abandon it. It's a well-meaning warning we've all heard as kids. Don't touch that baby bird. If you do, the mother will smell your scent and abandon it. It sounds tragic. One small act of kindness turns into permanent rejection. But here's the truth. Most birds have a terrible sense of smell. They won't notice your scent, and they won't abandon their chicks just because you touch them. In fact, many birds are deeply committed parents. They'll defend their nests fiercely and return even after brief disturbances, including handling by humans, especially during the early stages, when their babies still can't fly. Bird parents are hardwired to stay and care, not flee at the first whiff of human. Why the myth then? Part of it comes from our own emotions. We want kids to respect wildlife, and that's good. Telling them you'll scare the mom away forever is a strong deterrent. It also feels believable. We humans are sensitive to smells, so we project that onto animals. But while some birds like vultures and kiwis have better sniffers, the average songbird practically nose blind. That said, while touching a chick won't lead to abandonment, it's still best to leave wildlife alone when possible. Some fledglings may appear helpless on the ground, but they're often just learning to fly, with mom and dad watching from nearby. So, what should you do? If you find a chick in real danger, like in the middle of a road, it's okay to gently move it to a safer nearby spot. But don't stress about human scent. That's a myth. The real risk isn't your fingers. It's fear and misunderstanding. And the bird, chances are, she's already circling back, wondering why humans always make things more dramatic than they are. Sharks don't get cancer. It's a claim that sounds bold and mysterious. Sharks don't get cancer. You'll see it on health blogs, supplement ads, even in some documentaries, as if sharks hold the secret to immortality. But the truth, sharks can get cancer. And they do. The myth likely started in the 1970s and 80s, when researchers noticed that sharks seem to have fewer tumors than other animals. A few early studies hinted that cartilage in sharks might have anti-angiogenic properties, meaning it could help block blood vessel growth in tumors. Suddenly, books like Sharks Don't Get Cancer hit the shelves, claiming that consuming shark cartilage could prevent or cure cancer in humans. The idea took off, not because of strong science, but because it was hopeful, exotic, and marketable. But here's what further research found. Sharks do develop tumors in their muscles, cartilage, even their organs. In fact, scientists have documented many cases of shark cancer, including visible tumors, photographed in wild populations. And as for shark cartilage as a cancer treatment, clinical trials haven't shown meaningful benefits. Studies funded by the National Cancer Institute and other organizations found no significant effect in slowing or curing cancer. The hype didn't hold up. Meanwhile, the demand for cartilage supplements led to increased shark hunting, threatening species that were already vulnerable, all for a myth. Sharks are incredible creatures, with powerful immune systems and evolutionary quirks. But they're not invincible. They're just misunderstood. So no, sharks don't carry a miracle cure. They carry a lesson that wishful thinking can sometimes be more dangerous than the disease. Memory is stored in a specific part of the brain. It's tempting to imagine your brain like a filing cabinet. Where's that memory? Ah yes, back left drawer, third shelf, childhood birthday parties. We often think memory lives in one neat location, like a flash drive tucked into the side of your skull. But the truth, memory isn't stored in a single spot. It's spread out, across networks of neurons that light up in patterns like constellations. Different types of memory are processed in different regions. For example, the hippocampus plays a key role in forming new memories, especially episodic ones, like what you had for dinner or where you parked your car. Damage to the hippocampus. You may struggle to make new memories, even if old ones remain. But once memories are formed, they're stored elsewhere, often across the cerebral cortex, depending on what kind of memory it is. Visual memories engage the visual cortex. Language-related memories tap into areas like Broca's and Wernicke's emotional memories. The amygdala gets involved, and here's the mind-blowing part. Even a single memory, like the time you rode a bike for the first time, is likely stored in multiple locations at once. Sight, sound, motion, emotion, all woven together across brain regions that fire in sync when you recall it. So where's your memory? Everywhere and nowhere. Not in a drawer, in a dance. The myth of one memory center comes from how we try to simplify complex systems. But your brain isn't a warehouse. It's a living network, reshaping itself constantly through a process called neuroplasticity. So next time you forget where your keys are, don't blame a broken drawer, blame the system of systems, and maybe your lack of sleep. Humans have only 5 senses. We all learned it in school: sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. The classic 5, straight from Aristotle's playbook. But here's the thing. Humans have way more than 5 senses. Modern neuroscience recognizes at least 8 to 14 distinct senses, depending on how you define them. For example, ever close your eyes and touch your finger to your nose? That's proprioception, your sense of body position. It's how you know where your limbs are without looking. Not one of the big 5, but absolutely essential. How about equilibrioception, your sense of balance, governed by the fluid in your inner ear? It helps you stand, walk, or ride a bike without falling over. Again, not on the kindergarten poster, but pretty important. Then there's nociception, your sense of pain; thermoception, your sense of temperature; interoception, the sense of what's happening inside your body, like hunger, thirst, or needing to use the bathroom. Even senses like time and direction are being studied, not as mystical abilities, but as real, measurable processes in the brain. So why do we still teach 5 senses? Because it's simple, memorable. Aristotle's list has stuck around for over 2,000 years, and once something lands in a children's book or song lyric, it's hard to revise. But science moves on, and so should we. The human body isn't limited to 5 input channels. It's a multi-sensory instrument, constantly decoding the world through layers of perception we barely notice. So the next time someone asks you how many senses you have, you can say, well, 5 is a good start, and then blow their mind. You shouldn't wake a sleepwalker. You wake up in the middle of the night and see someone stumbling through the hallway, eyes open but empty, walking like a ghost. Don't wake them. Someone whispers. It could kill them. But here's the truth. Waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous. It's just difficult. The myth likely comes from the way sleepwalkers behave: confused, disoriented, sometimes even agitated when woken. But there's no medical evidence that waking a sleepwalker will harm them. You know what's actually dangerous: letting them roam unsupervised. Sleepwalking happens during deep sleep, usually in the first half of the night. The brain is asleep, but the body is active. The result? People might walk, eat, rearrange furniture, even leave the house, all without any memory of it, the next morning. So yes, waking them might be startling. They may be groggy, scared, or annoyed. But it's not life-threatening. What's more risky is what they might do while asleep. There are cases of people falling down stairs, walking into traffic, or injuring themselves simply because no one intervened, all in the name of not waking them up. Experts generally recommend gently guiding a sleepwalker back to bed, if possible. If they're in danger, it's perfectly fine to wake them. Just try to do it calmly and without grabbing or shouting. Think soft voice, gentle touch, like waking a confused traveler on a train. So no, you're not going to shock them to death. That's fiction, not neuroscience. If someone you love is wandering the house in a sleep daze, don't fear waking them. Fear what happens if you don't. Carrots improve your night vision. You've probably heard it at the dinner table. Eat your carrots. They'll help you see in the dark. It's a sweet little lie parents tell picky eaters. But here's the fun twist. This myth was started by the military. During World War II, the British Royal Air Force had a secret. They had developed radar technology that allowed pilots to locate enemy planes at night. But instead of announcing that to the world, they spread a clever bit of misinformation. Their pilots had exceptional night vision because they ate a lot of carrots. The public bought it. Newspapers ran with it. And suddenly, carrots were the miracle vegetable. Now, here's what's true. Carrots are high in beta-carotene, which the body converts into vitamin A, an essential nutrient for eye health. Severe vitamin A deficiency can lead to night blindness. So yes, in a malnourished person, carrots can help restore basic low-light vision. But if you're already getting enough vitamin A from a normal diet, eating more carrots won't give you superhero night vision. It's like putting more gas into a full tank. Your eyes already have what they need. So no, carrots won't turn you into a night owl or help you see through the dark like a cat. But they're still good for you, just not magic. In the end, the real genius wasn't the vegetable. It was the story. A wartime cover-up turned into a dinnertime legend, one crunchy myth at a time. Your heart stops when you sneeze. Did you know your heart stops when you sneeze? It's one of those strange little facts people toss out like trivia. Dramatic, mysterious, just believable enough to feel true. But here's the real story. Your heart does not stop when you sneeze. What actually happens is a brief and totally normal change in heart rhythm, not a complete stop. Here's how it works. Sneezing is a reflex, and it's a powerful one. It starts with a deep inhale, followed by a forceful expulsion of air, sometimes at speeds over 100 miles per hour. This sudden pressure change affects the vagus nerve, which plays a role in regulating heart rate. As a result, your heart may experience a slight pause or deceleration in rhythm, not a shutdown. It's a blip, a flutter, the kind of thing your heart does all the time, without you noticing. You might feel a momentary sensation, like your chest skipped a beat, but that's your body resetting pressure and breathing, not hitting a kill switch. So, where did the myth come from? Probably from how a sneeze feels. Abrupt, involuntary, kind of like a system reboot. Add in some drama, and an ancient fear of sudden death, and you've got a myth that's stuck. Even the old "God bless you after sneezing" was based on the idea that your soul might slip out when you sneeze, or your heart might stop just long enough to cause trouble. But fear not, your heart is tougher than that. Next time you sneeze, you're not dodging death, you're just clearing your senses. Blood is blue inside your body. You've probably seen it in textbooks, or on the inside of your wrist, blue lines under your skin. So, it must be true, right? Blood is blue until it hits oxygen. But nope, blood is never blue. Not inside you, not anywhere. The myth comes from a simple misunderstanding of veins and how light behaves under skin. Veins look blue because of optical illusion, not because the blood inside them is actually blue. Light penetrates your skin, and different wavelengths scatter differently. Blue light doesn't go as deep as red, and your brain interprets the reflected light as, well, blue. But if you were to draw blood from a vein, even one deep in your body, it's still red, just darker red than what's in your arteries. That's because oxygenated blood, the kind pumped fresh from your lungs, is a bright, vibrant red. Deoxygenated blood, the kind returning from your body's tissues, is darker, almost maroon, but never blue. Interestingly, some animals do have blue blood, like octopuses and horseshoe crabs. They use copper-based hemocyanin instead of iron-based hemoglobin. That's what makes their blood genuinely blue. But humans, we run on iron, and iron makes red. So why do medical diagrams use blue and red? It's just a teaching tool, a color code to show direction. Red for arteries, blue for veins. Clear and simple, and totally misleading if taken literally. So next time someone says, your blood is blue until it hits air, you can smile and say, nice theory, but it's red all the way through. Einstein failed math. It's one of the most famous feel-good myths in education. Don't worry if you're bad at math. Even Einstein failed it. It's inspiring, comforting, and completely false. Albert Einstein never failed math. In fact, by the time he was 11, he was already studying calculus, years ahead of his peers. So where did this myth come from? It likely began with a misinterpretation of school records. Einstein attended school in Germany and Switzerland, where they used different grading systems. A score of 6 was excellent in one country, but failing in another. Somewhere along the way, someone flipped the numbers, and the story spread. It didn't help that Einstein had a reputation for being a bit rebellious. He disliked rote learning and clashed with teachers, which made him seem like a poor student. But disliking school is not the same as struggling with the subject. In reality, Einstein excelled in math and physics from a young age. By 16, he was solving complex equations most of us wouldn't dare look at. His professors described him as brilliant, if a little independent. So why does the myth persist? Because it's comforting. It tells us that even the greatest minds stumbled, that genius can bloom late, that grades don't define worth. And while those ideas hold truth, they just don't apply to Einstein's math skills. So if you're struggling with math, you're in good company, just not Einstein's. His genius was real, and his grades reflected it. Sometimes, reality is more impressive than the myth. Humans swallow 8 spiders a year in their sleep. It's one of the most unsettling facts on the internet. You swallow 8 spiders a year in your sleep. Cue the shudders. And the sudden urge to tape your mouth shut at night. But the truth, there's no evidence this happens, and a whole lot of reasons it doesn't. Let's break it down. First, spiders are not suicidal. They're highly sensitive to vibrations, and a sleeping human is not exactly stealthy. We snore, we breathe heavily, we shift, twitch, roll over, all of which make us incredibly unappealing to a spider. Second, your open mouth isn't inviting. It's warm, wet, and noisy. And spiders don't go crawling into dark caverns with rhythmic exhalations. That's not how they survive. If anything, your mouth is a red flag danger zone for them. Third, no scientific study has ever documented a single case of a person swallowing a spider in their sleep, let alone 8 per year. The number was invented. In fact, this whole myth is believed to have started as a hoax, an example of how easily false information can spread. In the 1990s, a columnist wrote it to prove that people will believe anything if it sounds sciencey and gross. Mission accomplished. So why does it stick? Because it's memorable, creepy, the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl. And let's face it, spiders make for excellent villains in bedtime stories. But you can rest easy. Your dreams may be wild, but they're not crawling with spiders. If one ever does wander near you at night, chances are it'll go the other way. Toilets flush backwards in the southern hemisphere. It's a fun travel myth, the kind tourists love to test when they cross the equator. Toilets flush in the opposite direction down under. And yes, it's based on real science. but misapplied completely. The myth comes from something called the Coriolis effect, the idea that Earth's rotation causes fluids to spin in different directions depending on the hemisphere. It's true, but it applies to large-scale systems like hurricanes, not your bathroom plumbing. In the northern hemisphere, hurricanes spin counterclockwise. In the southern hemisphere, they spin clockwise. That's Coriolis at work. But when it comes to your toilet, nope, it doesn't apply. The direction your toilet flushes depends on the design of the toilet, the angle of the jets, the shape of the bowl, and the flow of water. A toilet in New York can flush clockwise or counterclockwise. Same in Sydney. Manufacturers decide, not geography. Even in controlled lab settings, Coriolis only affects tiny bodies of water if all other variables, like movement, shape, and vibration, are eliminated. And that's not your bathroom. So why do people believe it? Because it's a cool-sounding idea. It turns a trip to the bathroom into a science experiment. And it feels logical. The Earth spins, so water must too, right? But in reality, the only spin here is the one we told ourselves. So next time you travel across the equator, feel free to test the toilet if you want. Just don't expect the hemisphere to flush it differently. The tongue has specific taste zones. You might remember the diagram from school, a map of the tongue, divided into neat sections, sweet at the tip, salty at the sides, sour near the back, and bitter way in the back. It looked so scientific, so organized. But here's the thing, that taste map is wrong. The idea that different parts of the tongue taste only specific flavors was based on a misinterpretation of a 1901 paper by German scientist David Hennig. He measured how sensitive different parts of the tongue were to taste and found slight variations. But those variations were tiny, not exclusive zones. Later, someone translated his work, drew a diagram, and, thanks to a little oversimplification, we got a myth that stuck the tongue map. In reality, all areas of your tongue, as well as parts of your throat, and even the roof of your mouth, have taste receptors for all 5 primary tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. That's right, umami too, the savory flavor discovered later, and often missing from the old diagrams. Modern research using better tools and understanding has shown that while some parts of the tongue may be slightly more sensitive to certain tastes, the difference is minimal. There are no hard boundaries. So why do we still see the tongue map? Because it's simple. It makes a messy biological process look neat and tidy, and once it found its way into textbooks, it was hard to correct, like writing a mistake in pen and just hoping no one notices. But your taste buds aren't territorial. They work together, all over your mouth, all the time. So next time you enjoy a bite of chocolate or a tangy lemon, remember how your whole tongue is in on the experience. The map was just bad directions. Hair turns white from shock. You've heard the stories. Someone goes through a traumatic event, and the next morning, their hair has turned snow white overnight. It was the shock, they say. It sounds dramatic, cinematic, almost supernatural. But can shock really turn your hair white overnight? Not exactly. Here's what's actually going on. Hair gets its color from melanin, a pigment produced in hair follicles. As we age, these pigment cells gradually die off, and hair grows in gray or white. This is a slow, natural process. But what about sudden whitening? There's a rare condition called diffuse alopecia areata, in which the body's immune system attacks pigmented hair. If someone has a mix of dark and gray hairs, the dark ones may fall out rapidly, leaving behind only the white ones. It can look like the hair turned white overnight, when in fact, the colored hairs simply vanished. This effect has been linked to severe stress in some cases, but it's not fully understood, and it's extremely rare. The myth of shock whitening likely grew from stories of famous figures, like Marie Antoinette, whose hair was said to have turned white the night before her execution. But historians suspect she was already graying, and the legend added a poetic flair to her final hours. The reality is, once a hair leaves your scalp, its color is set. You can't drain the pigment from it with fear, grief, or trauma. Your hair doesn't bleach itself from emotion, so no, shock won't turn your hair white in a single night. But stress can affect your health, and over time, even speed up graying. It won't give you ghost hair, but it might give you a reason to breathe deeper. You can get arthritis from cold weather. It's a common belief, especially in colder months. Don't stay out in the cold, you'll get arthritis. It sounds logical. Cold air feels stiff. Joints ache more in winter, so naturally we blame the weather. But here's the truth. Cold weather doesn't cause arthritis. It can make symptoms feel worse, but it's not the cause. Arthritis is a condition involving inflammation of the joints, and there are over 100 types, including osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and gout. The causes vary, from genetics to immune system malfunctions to wear and tear over time. But weather isn't on the list. So why does it hurt more when it's cold? Researchers believe it's related to barometric pressure, the pressure in the air around us. When it drops, as it often does before cold or stormy weather, tissues around the joints may expand slightly, increasing pressure on the nerves. That can lead to increased stiffness or discomfort in people who already have arthritis. There's also the behavioral factor. When it's cold, we move less, exercise less, and stay indoors more. Joints like movement. Inactivity can make them feel stiffer, not because the cold caused damage, but because the lack of motion let things tighten up. So cold weather might be a trigger, but it's not a cause. You won't give yourself arthritis by being out in the snow, even if your joints complain about it. So bundle up, stay active, and maybe stretch a little more when it's chilly. Your joints prefer warmth, but they fear stillness more than frost. Dogs see in black and white. It's a common belief, usually said with a bit of pity. Dogs only see in black and white, as if they live in a world of old television, missing out on all the color and beauty around them. But that's not true. Dogs can see color, just not the same way humans do. Humans have 3 types of color receptors in our eyes, called cones, which allow us to see a wide spectrum of color: red, green, and blue. Dogs, on the other hand, have only 2 types of cones. This means they see the world in shades of blue and yellow, but they have a hard time distinguishing reds and greens. So while a bright red ball might pop to you, it might look like a brownish gray to your dog. But a yellow tennis ball? That's like a neon light in their eyes. Researchers confirmed this through behavioral tests, showing that dogs could distinguish between certain colors, particularly blues and yellows, but consistently failed to tell reds and greens apart. So, where did the black and white myth come from? Likely from early assumptions made before we had tools to test animal vision. People knew dogs had fewer cones than humans and just assumed their world lacked color entirely. But science evolved, and we discovered that while dogs aren't seeing the rainbow, they're not living in grayscale either. And here's the beautiful part. Dogs rely more on motion, contrast, and especially smell than they do on color. Their world is rich, just in ways we don't fully experience. So no, your dog isn't seeing life like a vintage film. It's more like a muted Instagram filter with amazing scent detail. The brain stops developing after childhood. You might have heard it in school, or maybe from someone trying to explain bad habits. Your brain stops developing after childhood. It paints a picture of the brain as something that hardens like cement, set in place by your teenage years. But here's the truth. Your brain continues to develop well into adulthood and keeps changing throughout your entire life. It's true that childhood and adolescence are periods of rapid brain growth. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and reasoning, doesn't fully mature until your mid-20s. That's why teens can be smart and impulsive at the same time. Their brains are still wiring up. But the idea that growth simply stops after that, that's outdated science. Enter neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. This process doesn't end when you become an adult. It happens every time you learn, every time you adapt to a new environment, every time you change a habit. Even the elderly can form new neural pathways. In fact, learning new skills like languages, music, or even dance has been shown to strengthen cognitive function in aging adults and reduce the risk of dementia. The myth probably came from older models of brain development that didn't account for plasticity. We used to believe that once brain cells died, they weren't replaced. But now we know that new neurons can form in parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, which is critical for memory. So no, your brain isn't stuck in whatever state childhood left it in. It's a living system, capable of growing, adapting, and rewiring itself. And that means you're never too old to change, to learn, or to grow. The limits you feel, often, they're not biological, they're beliefs. You can get sick from cold weather alone. It's one of the most repeated warnings of winter. Put on a jacket, or you'll catch a cold. It sounds so logical. Cold air, cold virus. They must be connected, right? But here's the truth. Cold weather doesn't cause colds. Viruses do. The common cold is caused by viruses, most often rhinoviruses, but also coronaviruses and others. You get sick when one of these viruses enters your body, usually through your nose, mouth, or eyes, not from the temperature outside. So where does this myth come from? Well, cold and flu season does happen during colder months, but that's not because the cold creates the virus. It's because of how people behave when it's cold. In winter, we spend more time indoors, with less ventilation and closer contact with others. Viruses spread more easily in warm, dry, indoor air. Plus, dry winter air can dry out the mucus in your nose, which weakens your body's first line of defense. Some studies also suggest that cooler temperatures may slightly suppress immune response in the nasal passages. But again, the cold doesn't create the illness. It just makes your body a little more vulnerable if a virus is already around. So no, stepping outside with wet hair won't summon a virus out of thin air. You have to come into contact with someone else who's already infected. The cold might give you chills, but it won't give you a cold. So wear a coat to stay comfortable. But if you really want to avoid getting sick, wash your hands, get enough sleep, and maybe don't breathe directly on strangers. Men think about sex every 7 seconds. It's a stat you've probably heard, maybe as a joke, maybe as a stereotype. Men think about sex every 7 seconds. That's over 8,000 times a day, which would mean most men can barely complete a sentence, let alone hold a job. But let's be clear, this claim has no scientific basis at all. It's one of those made-up facts that somehow made its way into pop culture and stuck, without anyone ever asking, wait, who's counting this? So what does the research actually say? A study from Ohio State University in 2011 asked college students to track how often they thought about sex, food, and sleep. The results: men reported thinking about sex around 19 times per day, on average. Women, around 10 times. So yes, men may think about sex more often, but nowhere near once every 7 seconds. That myth would mean over 500 times an hour during waking hours. It's not just false, it's absurd. The origin of the 7 seconds myth is unclear, but it likely emerged from cultural stereotypes. Men as primal, sex-obsessed creatures, constantly distracted by desire. It's the kind of soundbite that sticks, because it's shocking, funny, and easy to remember, not because it's accurate. The truth is, people think about lots of things: work, relationships, stress, lunch. Sex is just one part of the mental mix. And no, it doesn't override all logic every 7 seconds. So next time someone repeats that stat with a smirk, you can say, actually, science says otherwise. Then go back to thinking about whatever you are actually thinking about. We only have one moon phase per night. It seems obvious, right? You look up at the sky and see the moon, maybe a crescent, maybe full, and assume that's the phase for the night. But here's what's interesting. The moon phase doesn't change during the night, but what you see can vary by where you are on Earth. Says, let's clarify. The phase of the moon, waxing, waning, full, crescent, is determined by the angle between the sun, Earth, and moon. That phase stays the same for everyone on Earth during any given moment, because the moon's shape doesn't change. It's just the shadow that shifts over time. But what does change is your view of the moon. Someone in the northern hemisphere sees the moon oriented differently than someone in the southern hemisphere. For example, a crescent moon may appear like a C in one hemisphere and like a backward C in the other. Even from east to west across the globe, moonrise and moonset times shift. So people may see the moon at different heights in the sky, different angles, and even different brightness levels, depending on atmospheric conditions. So while the phase is the same globally, the experience of it, how it appears, where it is in the sky, how it's tilted, can feel different. The confusion likely comes from this visual variation. If someone sees a waxing crescent tilted to the right, and someone else sees it tilted to the left, it can look like two different phases, even though it's not. In short, we all live under the same moon phase, but with slightly different perspectives, kind of like everything else in life. Glass is a slow-flowing liquid. You may have heard this in a museum or science class. Old window panes are thicker at the bottom because glass flows over time. It's actually a slow-moving liquid. It sounds scientific, mysterious, almost magical, but it's not true. Glass is not a liquid. It doesn't flow. It's a solid, just a weird one. Here's where the confusion comes from. Glass is what scientists call an amorphous solid. That means its molecular structure is disordered, more like a liquid than a crystal, but it still behaves like a solid. It doesn't have a regular repeating pattern like ice or quartz, but once it cools into shape, it stays in that shape. It doesn't slump, sag, or drip over time, even over centuries. So why are some old window panes thicker at the bottom? Blame how they were made, not what they're made of. Centuries ago, glass was produced by hand, usually using a method called crown glass blowing. It left panes uneven in thickness. When installing them, glaziers often placed the heavier, thicker edge at the bottom for stability. It wasn't because the glass flowed downward, it was just human logic. Modern studies using electron microscopy and physics modeling have shown that if glass did flow, it would take trillions of years to show any visible change, longer than the age of the universe. So no, your living room window isn't melting in slow motion. Glass may be strange, structurally messy, optically clear, and chemically solid, but it's not oozing. Sometimes the real magic is that it looks like a liquid while staying perfectly still. Antibiotics work on viruses. You feel terrible, sore throat, fever, maybe a cough. You go to the doctor and say the magic words, "Can I get antibiotics?" But if you've got the flu or a cold, here's what you might hear. "Sorry, antibiotics won't help. It's a virus." And that's not the doctor being stingy. It's science. Antibiotics are designed to kill bacteria, not viruses. The two are completely different kinds of organisms. Bacteria are living cells with their own machinery. Antibiotics work by targeting that machinery, things like cell walls, protein synthesis, or DNA replication. Viruses, on the other hand, are more like hijackers. They aren't cells at all. They invade your own cells and use your body's own systems to reproduce. That's why antibiotics have no effect. There's nothing for them to attack. Taking antibiotics for a viral infection doesn't just fail to help, it can actually do harm. It contributes to antibiotic resistance, where bacteria evolve to survive the drugs we use against them. This makes real bacterial infections harder to treat, even deadly. And yet, millions of people still take antibiotics for colds, flus, and other viral illnesses. Why? Because we hate feeling helpless. We want to do something. And for decades, antibiotics have been seen as a kind of magic pill, even when they don't fit the problem. If you're sick with a virus, rest, fluids, and time are usually the best medicine. And if there's a treatment, it'll likely be an antiviral, not an antibiotic. So the next time you're feeling rough and hear it's viral, remember, it's not a brush off, it's precision. You can detox your body with juice. You've seen the ads, heard the influencers. Try a juice cleanse. It flushes toxins and resets your body. It sounds healthy, natural, almost spiritual. But here's the hard truth. Your body doesn't need juice to detox. It already has organs for that. The whole idea of detoxing with juice is mostly marketing, not medicine. Your liver, kidneys, lungs, and even your skin are constantly removing waste and harmful substances from your body. That's their job, and they're incredibly efficient at it, unless they're failing, in which case you need a hospital, not a green smoothie. Juice cleanses usually involve drinking only fruit or vegetable juice for a few days. No solid food, no protein, and very few calories. While that might give you the feeling of cleansing, what you're actually doing is starving your body of essential nutrients. Yes, you might lose weight, but it's mostly water and muscle, not fat. And once you start eating normally again, it usually comes right back. Studies have shown that juice cleanses don't remove toxins, because the concept of toxins in these diets is rarely defined. What toxins? Where are they stored? What evidence do we have that juice speeds up their removal? Spoiler, almost none. Now drinking juice isn't bad, in moderation. Fresh juice can provide vitamins and antioxidants, but so can eating whole fruits and vegetables, with the added bonus of fiber, which juice strips away. So if you want to reset your body, try sleep, hydration, whole foods, exercise. Juice alone won't purify your bloodstream. Your liver's got that covered. Napoleon was short. It's one of the most famous character traits in history. Napoleon was short. So much so, there's even a psychological complex named after him, the Napoleon complex, where short people supposedly overcompensate with ambition or aggression. But here's the thing. Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't actually short. By historical records, Napoleon stood around 5 feet 6 or 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was average height for a Frenchman in the early 1800s. So where did the myth come from? A big part of the confusion lies in units of measurement. At the time of his death, Napoleon's height was recorded as 5 feet 2 inches, but in French inches, which were longer than English inches. When converted to English measurements, he was closer to 5 foot 6, maybe even 5 foot 7. There's also the role of British propaganda. England, Napoleon's longtime enemy, portrayed him in political cartoons as a small, angry man, to belittle him, both literally and figuratively. The image stuck. Small man, big ego, easy villain. And of course, he often surrounded himself with tall bodyguards, which didn't help perception. Standing next to giants, anyone looks small. The irony, Napoleon commanded massive armies, conquered much of Europe, and changed the course of history. Yet what we remember most is a height joke. So no, Napoleon wasn't short. But the myth about him, that's larger than life. Sugar causes diabetes. It sounds like common sense. Eating too much sugar causes diabetes. We picture a straight line, sugar in, diabetes out. But the truth is a little more complex. Sugar doesn't directly cause diabetes, but it can contribute, depending on the type of diabetes and the bigger picture of your health. Let's break it down. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. It happens when the body's immune system attacks insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. It has nothing to do with sugar consumption. It's not preventable, and it's not caused by diet. Type 2 diabetes, on the other hand, is linked to insulin resistance. When your body becomes less responsive to insulin, the hormone that helps regulate blood sugar. This condition is influenced by genetics, body weight, physical activity, and yes, diet. Consistently consuming too many refined sugars and processed carbs can lead to weight gain, particularly visceral fat around the organs, which raises the risk of insulin resistance. Over time, that can contribute to the development of type 2 diabetes. So it's not just sugar. It's about overall energy balance, lifestyle, and metabolic health. Ironically, natural sugars found in whole fruits, paired with fiber, vitamins, and antioxidants, aren't the problem. The real danger lies in added sugars, especially from sweetened drinks, candy, pastries, and ultra-processed snacks that spike blood sugar quickly and often. So while sugar isn't the villain in a black hat, it does play a role, especially when overconsumed and combined with other risk factors. The myth oversimplifies the science, but it also misses the message. It's not about banning sugar, it's about balance, movement, and listening to what your body really needs. You must wait 30 minutes after eating to swim. It's a summer classic. You've just finished lunch by the pool, and someone says, wait 30 minutes before you swim, or you'll cramp and drown. It sounds serious, life or death. But here's the truth. There's no scientific evidence that swimming right after eating is dangerous. The idea likely comes from the redistribution of blood during digestion. When you eat, your body sends more blood to your stomach and intestines to help process the food. The old belief was that this left your muscles short on blood, and if you exercised, especially by swimming, you'd get a cramp and potentially drown. But in reality, your body is very good at multitasking. It can digest and move your limbs at the same time, no problem. Studies haven't shown any increased risk of drowning or severe muscle cramps from swimming after eating. In fact, many athletes eat small meals or snacks before training, including swimming, without any trouble. Now, could you get a minor side stitch or feel sluggish after a heavy meal? Sure, but that's true for any activity, not just swimming. And it's more about comfort than safety. So where did the myth come from? Likely from cautious parents and camp counselors trying to prevent accidents by encouraging rest. And hey, encouraging digestion time in the shade isn't a bad thing. But the 30-minute rule isn't backed by physiology, so if you want to float, splash, or swim a few laps after lunch, you're fine. Just listen to your body, not the outdated warning signs. Your sandwich won't sink you. You only have one dominant brain hemisphere. You've probably heard the labels. Left-brained people are logical and analytical. Right-brained people are creative and emotional. It's a neat way to categorize people, like horoscopes for neuroscience. But here's the truth. You use both sides of your brain, all the time. The idea that people are either left-brained or right-brained comes from studies in the 1960s, especially research on split-brain patients. People who had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed to treat epilepsy. Scientists found that the hemispheres had specialized functions. The left side handled language and detail-oriented tasks. The right was better with spatial awareness and emotional processing. But the myth came when those findings were oversimplified into personality types. In reality, the two hemispheres constantly communicate and collaborate through a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. When you speak, both hemispheres are involved. When you paint, solve math, play music, recognize faces, your brain lights up on both sides. It's not a battle of logic versus creativity. It's a team effort. Modern neuroimaging confirms this. Even tasks that are slightly weighted to one hemisphere still involve complex crosstalk between regions. The brain isn't a divided house. It's a networked orchestra. So why do we love the left brain, right brain idea? Because it gives us identity. It's tidy, it's flattering, it turns our preferences into biology. But real intelligence and personality doesn't live on just one side of the skull. So the next time someone tells you they're right-brained, tell them you're whole-brained, and so are they. Cracking your back is bad for your spine. You stretch, twist, and pop, that satisfying crack. Instant relief. But then someone nearby winces and says, you shouldn't crack your back. It's bad for your spine. But is it? Not really. Cracking your back isn't inherently harmful. In fact, it's often just the sound of gas bubbles in your joints being released, not bones grinding or cartilage wearing down. Here's what's actually happening. Your spine has tiny joints, called facet joints, surrounded by fluid. When you move or stretch, pressure changes inside these joints can cause nitrogen gas to form a bubble. And when that bubble collapses, pop, It's called cavitation, and it's harmless for most people. The myth likely comes from a general fear of joint cracking. People think it leads to arthritis or long-term damage, but studies, including one published in the journal Spine, show no link between habitual back cracking and spinal degeneration. In fact, chiropractors and physical therapists often use spinal adjustments as part of treatment, safely and effectively, for issues like stiffness, mild misalignment, or tension. That said, if you're forcefully twisting yourself all day or trying to self-adjust with wild contortions, that's a different story. Repeated, aggressive movements can strain muscles or ligaments, especially if you're compensating for deeper structural issues. And if your back cracking comes with pain, tingling, or numbness, that's not normal. It's time to see a professional. But for most people, that satisfying pop is just your body resetting pressure, not falling apart. So crack away, carefully. Your spine can handle it. Hair grows faster when you trim it. It's one of the most widely shared beauty tips. Trim your hair often. It makes it grow faster. Sounds logical. Clean up the ends. Stimulate the roots. Speed up the growth. Right. But here's the truth. Trimming your hair has no effect on how fast it grows. Hair growth happens at the follicle level, deep inside your scalp, not at the ends. Your hair grows about ½ inch per month, on average, regardless of how often you cut it. Trimming doesn't send a signal to your scalp to speed things up. So why do people swear by it? Because trimming can make your hair look healthier. When you cut off split ends and damaged tips, your hair appears thicker, smoother, and fuller. That gives the illusion of faster growth, even though the rate hasn't changed. Plus, damaged ends can break off, which shortens the length of your hair over time, even as it grows from the roots. So regular trims help retain length, not increase speed. It's kind of like mowing your lawn. It doesn't make the grass grow faster, but it sure makes it look better. So if you're growing out your hair, trims help prevent breakage, keep your style tidy, and avoid that scraggly look. But they won't put your hair into overdrive. Want to boost real growth? Focus on nutrition, scalp health, and reducing stress, things that affect the root of the issue, literally. Because growth doesn't start at the ends. It starts where you can't see it. Lightning causes cars to explode. It's the stuff of action movies and urban legends. If lightning hits a car, boom, it explodes. It's dramatic, explosive, pure Hollywood. But in real life, lightning striking a car usually doesn't cause an explosion. It protects you. Here's why. When lightning hits a vehicle, the electricity travels along the outer metal frame, not through the interior. This is known as a Faraday cage effect. The metal conducts the current around the cabin and safely into the ground. That's right. Cars are one of the safest places to be during a lightning storm, as long as all windows are closed and you're not touching any metal parts inside. But what about the tires? A common myth says rubber tires protect the car. Not quite. Lightning can leap across miles of air. It doesn't care about a few inches of rubber. The real reason you're safe is the metal shell, not the tires. Now, to be clear, a lightning strike can damage a car. It may scorch the exterior, fry electronics, or shatter windows. It might even leave a hole in the roof, or blast off side mirrors. But exploding in flames, like a blockbuster stunt, that's extremely rare. The fuel tank is designed to withstand external heat and impact, and modern safety standards make spontaneous combustion almost impossible from a lightning strike alone. So the next time you hear thunder while driving, don't panic. Stay inside the car, hands off the radio, feet on the floor, and wait it out. Your car isn't a bomb. It's a metal umbrella with wheels. Humans only dream in black and white. It's a strange, dreamy claim you might have heard. People only dream in black and white. Maybe you've even wondered if your own dreams lack color. But here's the truth. Most people today dream in full color, and we probably always have. So, where did the black and white idea come from? It turns out, this myth peaked in the 1940s and 1950s, the same era when black and white television and film were everywhere. Several studies from that time found that many participants reported dreaming without color, but it had less to do with biology and more to do with media exposure. As color media became the norm, so did color-in reported dreams. Later research, like a 2008 study in the journal Consciousness and Cognition, showed that people who grew up with black and white TV were more likely to report dreaming in black and white. Even decades later, people raised in the age of color screens, they mostly dream in full, vivid hues. This suggests that how we remember dreams may be shaped by what we expect or accustomed to, not by how we actually experience them. Neurologically, dreaming activates the visual cortex, and brain scans show patterns that suggest rich sensory experiences, including color. Some dreams are certainly more muted or foggy, but others can be as vibrant as a painting. So the black and white dream myth, it's less about how we sleep and more about how we watch. Your brain isn't stuck in an old TV era. It's projecting in full technicolor, even if you don't always remember it that way. You can cure a hangover with more alcohol. You've heard it, maybe even tried it. Hair of the dog, they say. Drink a little more alcohol, and your hangover will magically go away. But here's the reality. Drinking more alcohol doesn't cure a hangover. It just delays it, and may make it worse. The idea comes from the old expression, hair of the dog that bit you, meaning a small dose of what harmed you might help you recover. In medieval times, people literally used bits of animal fur in folk remedies. The phrase stuck, and somehow became a hangover strategy. But scientifically, not so helpful. Hangovers are caused by a combination of factors: dehydration from alcohol's diuretic effect, inflammation from immune system responses, low blood sugar, toxic byproducts like acetaldehyde, and disruptions to sleep quality. Drinking more alcohol might temporarily numb the symptoms by activating reward pathways or masking discomfort, but it does nothing to solve the underlying issues. In fact, it just extends the burden on your liver and further dehydrates you. It's like hitting snooze on a fire alarm. The fire's still burning. If you want real hangover relief, here's what works better: water and electrolytes. Nutritious food to stabilize blood sugar, rest and time, because your body needs to process the alcohol fully. So yes, another drink might make you feel better for a little while, but it's not a cure. It's a distraction in a glass. If you want to feel better tomorrow, stop sipping today, because the only true hangover cure is prevention. Chameleons change color to match their surroundings. It's the classic animal superpower. Chameleons can change color to blend into their environment, like little shape-shifting ninjas. But while it sounds like camouflage genius, it's not entirely true. Yes, chameleons change color, but not primarily to match their surroundings. They do it for communication, temperature regulation, and mood expression. Chameleons have special skin cells called iridophores, which contain tiny crystals. These crystals reflect light, and by adjusting their spacing, chameleons can manipulate the wavelengths or colors that bounce off their skin. Think of it like a biological LCD screen. When a chameleon is angry, it might turn bright and bold to signal aggression. When it's relaxed, it might go pale or neutral. During mating season, males flash vibrant colors to attract females or intimidate rivals. Some also darken to absorb more heat or lighten up to stay cool. A built-in temperature dial. Camouflage can happen, especially in species that naturally blend with their habitat. But it's not like they see a green leaf and instantly become that exact shade. Their color range is limited, and blending in is more of a happy coincidence than a mission. The myth likely comes from exaggeration and awe. We saw color shifts and assumed stealth. But the real story is even cooler. Chameleons aren't hiding, they're talking with color in high def. So no, they're not invisible shapeshifters. They're just really stylish mood lamp. Alcohol kills brain cells. It's a sobering line you've probably heard. Every drink kills brain cells. One wild night out, and suddenly, you're picturing neurons dropping like flies. But let's clear it up. Moderate alcohol consumption doesn't kill brain cells. That myth has been around for decades, partly because alcohol does affect the brain, just not in the way people often imagine. When you drink, alcohol interferes with neurotransmitters, slows down brain function, and impairs memory and coordination. Long-term heavy drinking can cause serious brain damage, but not because it literally kills neurons on contact. Instead, it affects the connections between brain cells, reducing the brain's ability to form new memories, weakening cognitive function, and shrinking certain brain regions, like the frontal lobe and hippocampus. Chronic alcoholism can also lead to a condition called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, a severe memory disorder caused by vitamin B1, thiamine deficiency, often due to poor diet in heavy drinkers. But none of this comes from neurons exploding every time you sip wine. Studies, including those from the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, have found no evidence that moderate drinking kills brain cells. The cells remain alive, but their function may be dulled temporarily, especially with overuse. So, the damage isn't about death, it's about disruption. If you drink excessively and often, you can absolutely harm your brain over time. But if you have a glass of wine now and then, your neurons will be just fine, if maybe a little dizzy. The moon has a dark side. It sounds mysterious, ominous, even poetic. The dark side of the moon. You hear it in songs, sci-fi stories, and late-night theories, as if half the moon lives in eternal shadow. But here's the truth. There is no permanent dark side of the moon. What people usually mean is the far side, the half of the moon that always faces away from Earth. And yes, it was hidden from human eyes until we sent spacecraft to orbit it. But dark? Not at all. The moon is tidally locked, meaning it rotates on its axis at the same rate it orbits Earth, once every 27.3 days. That's why we always see the same face. But both sides of the moon experience day and night, just like Earth. As the moon orbits, the sun shines on different parts of its surface. One half isn't bathed in darkness forever. It gets sunlight for about half of each lunar day, which lasts about 29 Earth days. So why the confusion? Partly from language. Calling it the dark side sounds cool and mysterious, especially in pop culture. But in astronomy, dark doesn't mean lightless. It just meant unknown. Back when we hadn't seen it yet. Now we have. In 1959, the Soviet spacecraft, Luna 3, photographed it for the first time. Since then, satellites, and even a Chinese rover, have explored the far side. And what they found wasn't darkness, just more craters, ridges, and moon dust. So no, the moon doesn't hide half its face in eternal night. It just turns slowly and shows us only one side, but the other, it's not dark, just distant. Yawning means you're tired, you're in a meeting, or sitting in class, and suddenly, yawn. Immediately, someone says, didn't sleep enough. But here's the surprising truth. Yawning isn't always about being tired. In fact, we don't fully understand why we yawn, but it's probably not just sleepiness. Yes, yawning can be linked to fatigue or boredom, but not because your body is begging for rest. Instead, one theory suggests yawning may serve as a cooling mechanism for the brain. When your brain gets warm or overactive, a deep yawn increases blood flow and cools things down, like opening a window to let in fresh air. Another idea, social bonding. Yawns are contagious. If someone nearby yawns, there's a good chance you will too. This isn't just mimicry, it's believed to be linked to empathy and social connection. Studies have shown that we're more likely to catch yawns from people we're emotionally close to than from strangers. Yawning also happens in animals. Dogs, chimpanzees, even birds yawn. And like humans, they sometimes do it in moments of tension, transition, or social signaling. And here's a fun twist. We don't only yawn when we're tired. People yawn when they're stressed, nervous, or even right before athletic performance, moments when the body is shifting gears. So while yawning at bedtime makes sense, it's not a perfect indicator of tiredness. It's more like your brain saying, let me reset for a second. So the next time someone accuses you of being sleepy after a yawn, you can smile and say, actually, my brain might just be cooling down or bonding with you. Waking up sleep paralysis is dangerous. You wake up, but you can't move. Your body is frozen. Your eyes are open. Maybe you feel a weight on your chest or a presence in the room. It's terrifying, and it's called sleep paralysis. But here's the myth that often follows. Don't try to wake someone having sleep paralysis. It could hurt them. In reality, waking someone during sleep paralysis isn't dangerous. And if anything, it might actually help them snap out of the episode faster. Sleep paralysis happens when your mind wakes up before your body does. It typically occurs during transitions into or out of REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreaming happens, and where your body is naturally paralyzed to keep you from acting out your dreams. During sleep paralysis, the brain is alert, but the muscles are still in REM lockdown. That's what creates the terrifying mismatch. You're awake, but you can't move, speak, or even call for help. People often experience hallucinations during these episodes. Shadows, whispers, pressure, even full-blown figures. It feels supernatural, but it's just the dreaming brain bleeding into waking awareness. Trying to wake someone gently, by touching them, calling their name, or helping them change position, is not dangerous. The fear of locking them into the state is just that fear. There's no medical risk in waking someone from it, and it often helps end the episode faster. The real harm comes from the panic, confusion, and lack of understanding around the experience. Sleep paralysis is common. Up to 1 in 4 people will experience it at some point. It's not a curse. It's not possession. It's just a glitch between sleep and wake. So if someone you know is going through it, you don't have to stand back in fear. A calm voice and gentle reassurance can do more than you think. You can suck out snake venom. It's a scene you've seen in 100 movies. Someone gets bitten by a snake, and their friend leaps into action. Their friend leaps into action. This, hold still. I'll suck out the venom. Heroic, maybe, but effective? Not at all. The idea that you can suck venom out of a snake bite is a dangerous myth. One that's been widely debunked by toxicologists and emergency medicine experts. Here's why it doesn't work. When a venomous snake bites, the venom spreads rapidly through the lymphatic system and bloodstream. By the time you're pulling out your pocket knife and doing the whole cowboy routine, the toxins are already moving far beyond the bite site. Suction, whether by mouth or with a pump, removes almost no venom. Studies show it extracts less than 2%, often too late to make any difference. Worse, trying to suck venom by mouth can damage tissue, introduce infection, and even poison the rescuer if they have open cuts or sores in their mouth. So what should you do? Do not try to be a hero with your teeth. The real first aid is boring, but life-saving. Stay calm, don't move, get help. So next time a movie shows someone sucking venom out of a snake bite, you'll know they're not saving the day. They're just spreading the myth. Touching a toad can make you trip, psychedelically. It's one of those bizarre-sounding urban legends that somehow stuck around. Touch a certain toad, and you'll hallucinate, as if these slimy creatures are nature's little LSD dispensers. But here's the truth. Touching a toad won't make you trip. Licking one might, but that's a very different story, and still not a good idea. The myth comes from a real species, the Colorado river toad, also known as the Sonoran desert toad. It secretes a substance called 5-MeO-DMT, a powerful psychedelic compound. But here's the catch. It's found in the toad's glands and only becomes active when dried and smoked. Touching the toad won't do anything. And licking it, that could be dangerous or even deadly, because toads also secrete toxins that can cause serious heart problems, especially in pets and children. The hallucination myth was popularized through media and counterculture folklore, but scientists and poison control centers have long warned against it. These toads aren't mystical drug dealers. They're just amphibians trying to stay alive by making themselves unappetizing. So no, You can't trip just by touching a turf, and trying to push the envelope could leave you poisoned, not enlightened. The real trip is how far this myth has spread, leaping from deserts to dorm rooms, from folk tales to festival whispers, without ever landing on the truth. The brain is the most energy-hungry organ. You've probably heard this impressive-sounding fact. The brain uses more energy than any other organ in the body. It's the hungriest part of you. And while that sounds believable, it's not exactly true. Yes, the brain is incredibly active. It accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but uses roughly 20% of your resting energy. That's a big slice of the pie, especially considering it's just a lump of tissue in your skull. But here's where the myth twists things. The brain doesn't use more energy than the muscles during exercise, or more than the liver during digestion. In fact, depending on your activity, other organs can easily outpace the brain in energy demand. Your muscles, during intense movement or physical labor, can consume more than 50% of your total energy. Your liver, which handles digestion, detox, and chemical balance, is a metabolic powerhouse working 24/7. The myth likely came from comparisons at rest, when the body is doing very little, and the brain's background activity is still humming along, solving problems, regulating temperature, keeping you breathing and aware. So is the brain energy hungry? Absolutely. Is it always the hungriest? Not quite. It's not a competition anyway. Your organs are a team, and each one steps up when the moment calls for it. Shaving your face makes you age faster. You might have heard it in passing, maybe from a friend or a beauty article. Don't shave too much. It'll make your skin age faster. It sounds plausible. After all, shaving involves scraping a blade across your face. But the truth is, shaving doesn't cause premature aging. Here's what's really going on. Shaving removes dead skin cells along with facial hair. That's actually a mild form of exfoliation. In fact, some skincare treatments use the same concept, like dermaplaning, to improve skin texture and glow. So while shaving might cause temporary irritation, if done carelessly, it doesn't trigger wrinkles, sagging, or speed up aging. So why does this myth exist? It's likely a case of confusing correlation with cause. As people age, they tend to shave more often. Over time, they naturally develop wrinkles and skin changes. The mistake is blaming the razor, not the clock. Poor shaving habits, like using dull blades or skipping moisturizers, can lead to dryness, razor burn, or nicks. But those are short-term issues. They don't cause long-term skin aging. In fact, with proper technique, shaving can help your skin stay smoother and clearer. So no, shaving your face won't make you look older faster. The only thing aging your face is time, and maybe a little too much sun. All dinosaurs were huge. When you hear the word dinosaur, your mind probably jumps to towering giants. Tyrannosaurus, Rex, Brachiosaurus. Massive creatures as big as buildings, shaking the earth with every step. But here's what the fossil record actually tells us. Most dinosaurs were not massive. In fact, many were surprisingly small, some no bigger than a modern bird or house cat. The smallest dinosaur fossil ever discovered was about the size of a hummingbird. The myth of the giant dinosaur comes mostly from popular culture. Movies, books, and museum displays tend to spotlight the most dramatic species. And who can blame them? A towering Ted Rex is hard to forget. But the truth is, dinosaur species came in all shapes and sizes. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4. Some ran fast and hunted prey, while others waddled slowly and grazed on plants. And here's the twist. Birds are technically dinosaurs. They evolved from a group of 2-legged feathered dinosaurs called theropods. So in a very real sense, dinosaurs never went extinct. They just evolved into a new form, and many of them now fly above us. So the next time someone says dinosaurs were all giants, you can remind them that the dinosaurs didn't all disappear. Some of them just learned how to tweet. You only catch STDs through intercourse. It's a common belief, especially among teens and even some adults. You can only get a sexually transmitted disease through intercourse, but that's not true. STDs, or more accurately, STIs, sexually transmitted infections, can spread through any kind of intimate contact, not just vaginal or anal sex. Many infections are passed through skin-to-skin contact, oral sex, or sharing unclean tools like razors or needles. Some, like herpes or HPV, can be transmitted even when no visible symptoms are present. Just rubbing against infected skin is enough. Oral sex can transmit infections like gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, and even HIV in rare cases. And sharing sex toys without cleaning them between partners. So a risk. Even kissing, though rare, can transmit infections like herpes if one person has an active sore. So where does the myth come from? It's partly due to how sex education has historically focused on penetration as the main risk, ignoring the wide range of other behaviors that can also lead to infection. It's also about comfort. It's easier to believe that just fooling around is safe, especially when people want to avoid hard conversations. But safety isn't about what feels safe. It's about what is. Protection, like condoms and dental dams, significantly reduce the risk, but only when used properly and consistently. And regular testing is just as important, because many STIs show no symptoms at all for months or even years. So no, it's not just intercourse. STIs don't care what you call it. They just care about contact. Earth is closer to the sun in summer. It sounds perfectly reasonable. Summer is hot. The sun is bright. So the Earth must be closer to the sun during that time of year. Right. Actually, the opposite is true. Earth is farthest from the sun during the northern hemisphere's summer. The closest point, called perihelion, occurs around early January. The farthest point, called aphelion, happens in early July, right when people in the north are sweating in the summer heat. So if distance from the sun doesn't cause the seasons, what does? The answer is tilt. Earth is tilted about 23.5 degrees on its axis. This tilt means that during summer in the northern hemisphere, that part of the Earth is tilted toward the sun, receiving more direct sunlight for longer periods of the day. In winter, it's tilted away, getting sunlight at a lower angle and for fewer hours. The same goes for the southern hemisphere, but in reverse. When it's winter up north, it's summer down south. So the seasons are all about angle, not distance. The idea that we're closer to the sun in summer is an intuitive guess, but it just doesn't hold up. If distance were the cause, both hemispheres would experience summer at the same time, and they don't. So next time someone says summer means we're nearer the sun, you can remind them that Earth's path is more subtle than that. It's not about closeness, it's about the way we lean. Touching rusty metal gives you tetanus. It's a classic warning we've all heard. Don't touch that rusty nail, you'll get tetanus. The image is vivid. Rust equals danger. But here's what most people get wrong. Tetanus isn't caused by rust. It's caused by bacteria. Specifically, a bacterium called Clostridium tetani, which lives in soil, dust, and manure. It can enter the body through cuts or puncture wounds. Once inside, it releases a toxin that affects your nervous system, causing painful muscle spasms, lockjaw, and in severe cases, death. So where does the rust come in? Rust itself doesn't carry tetanus, but rusty objects, like nails, tools, or old fences, often live outdoors or in dirty environments, where Clostridium tetani might also be found. That's why rusty metal became associated with tetanus risk, not because of the rust, but because of the setting. In reality, a clean, shiny garden tool can pose just as much danger if it's contaminated. And a rusty sculpture in a museum, probably no risk at all. It's not about oxidation, it's about exposure to the bacteria. That's why doctors don't ask, was it rusty? When treating a wound, they ask when your last tetanus shot was. Tetanus is preventable, not by avoiding rust, but by keeping your vaccinations up to date. So next time you step on a nail, don't worry if it's rusty or not. Just get it cleaned, Watch for infection and check your booster, because tetanus doesn't care about rust. It cares about entry. You should pee on a jellyfish sting. It's one of the most unforgettable myths in pop culture. Someone gets stung by a jellyfish, and the solution: urinate on the sting. The idea shows up in sitcoms, beach survival guides, and internet advice threads. But let's be clear from the start. Peeing on a jellyfish sting can make it worse, not better. Here's what's really going on. Jellyfish stings come from tiny barbed cells called nematocysts, which inject venom when triggered. Some of these cells fire on contact, but others stay dormant on the skin, ready to activate again if provoked. The key to treatment is neutralizing or removing those cells without triggering them further. Urine is a wild card. Depending on the person's hydration, pH level, or salt content, it can trigger more stinging rather than stopping it. Studies, including those published in medical journals, have tested various fluids, and urine consistently ranks low or harmful as a treatment. So where did the myth come from? Probably from misunderstanding. Urine is sterile, so people assumed it was safe. Others may have confused it with vinegar, which actually can help inactivate nematocysts, but only for certain species, like box jellyfish. For others, vinegar might not help at all. So what should you do? Rinse the sting with salt water, not fresh water, which can trigger stinging. Then use tweezers or a credit card edge to gently remove any visible tentacles. Applying heat, like soaking the area in hot water, has been shown to reduce pain and break down the venom. Most importantly, seek medical attention if the sting causes severe pain, allergic reactions, or symptoms beyond the sting site. So next time someone gets stung and someone else starts unzipping, tell them to stop. There are better ways to help, and much less awkward ones. The 5-second rule keeps food safe. You drop a cookie on the floor, you glance around, and someone says it was fine. 5-second rule. It's a comforting idea. As long as food isn't on the ground too long, it stays clean. But here's the truth. Bacteria don't carry stopwatches. Contamination can happen immediately. The moment food hits a dirty surface, microbes can transfer, especially if the food is moist or sticky. In fact, a 2007 study from Clemson University showed that bacteria like Salmonella can jump onto food within less than a second. So where did this myth come from? Probably from wishful thinking. The 5-second rule makes us feel better about eating food we didn't quite save. It turns an accident into a joke, a built-in excuse, and culturally, it caught on fast. Everyone likes a rule that justifies bad decisions. To be fair, not all surfaces are equally filthy. A dry cookie on a clean kitchen counter might pick up fewer bacteria than a slice of watermelon dropped on a gym floor. But time on the floor is less important than what kind of surface and what kind of food you're dealing with. So is it always dangerous? No. Is it always safe? Also no. It's a gamble, not a rule. If you really want to avoid risk, skip the snack. Or at least, don't pretend 5 seconds is some magical buffer. Bacteria don't wait. They just stick. Milk builds strong bones, for everyone. It's a message we've all heard since childhood. Drink your milk. It builds strong bones. And it's not entirely wrong. But it's not the whole story either. Milk is a good source of calcium and vitamin D, both of which are important for bone health. But the idea that milk is a universal solution for strong bones, for everyone, at every age, in every culture, is a myth built more on marketing than medical certainty. The dairy industry has spent decades promoting milk as an essential part of a healthy diet. And while it can help, bone strength depends on much more than how much milk you drink. Genetics, weight-bearing exercise, overall diet, hormone levels, and age all play major roles in bone density. And here's the twist. Some countries with the highest milk consumption also have high rates of osteoporosis, especially among older adults. Why? One reason might be that milk alone isn't enough. Without resistance training, vitamin K, magnesium, And a balanced diet, calcium can only go so far. Plus, some people, especially those of East Asian, African, or indigenous descent, are lactose intolerant and don't absorb dairy efficiently, making other sources more important. And no, drinking extra milk won't make your bones superhuman. Once you reach your peak bone mass in your 20s or 30s, the focus shifts to preserving it, not building more. So is milk good? Sure, for many. Is it a miracle cure for bone health? Strong bones come from a whole system, not a single glass. And milk, it's just one sip of the story. Body heat escapes, mainly through your feet. You've probably been told to wear socks to stay warm, or heard someone say, most of your body heat escapes through your feet. But here's the truth. Heat doesn't prefer your feet. It escapes wherever your skin is exposed. The myth likely comes from a broader version. The idea that you lose most of your body heat through your head, or sometimes your feet or hands. But multiple studies have shown that heat loss is simply a function of surface area, exposure, and insulation, not body part. If you walk outside in winter with bare feet and everything else bundled up, of course, you'll lose heat through your feet. But the same would be true if you walked outside with no pants. The feet aren't special, they're just usually uncovered. The origin of this myth may go back to military studies in the 1950s, where subjects lost a lot of heat through their heads, but only because the rest of their bodies were well insulated. It wasn't the head that was magical, it was just the only place left for heat to escape. Feet and hands are more sensitive to cold, though that's because they're at the body's extremities, with less muscle and more blood vessels close to the skin, so they feel cold faster, but they don't dump heat faster than other bare skin. So does wearing socks help? Absolutely, but not because your feet are some secret radiator. It helps because covering skin reduces heat loss, period. So bundle up evenly, and don't believe heat has a favorite exit. The Great Fire of London was started by a bakery mistake. It's one of the most famous stories in British history. The Great Fire of London began in 1666 in a small bakery on Pudding Lane. And the tale goes like this. A baker forgot to extinguish his oven. A spark caught fire, and the rest is history. 4 days later, most of the city was ash. But here's what most people get wrong. Yes, the fire started at the bakery, but it wasn't a simple mistake, and it didn't spread the way people think. The bakery belonged to Thomas Fariner, a baker for the Royal Navy. Records show that his oven likely did ignite the fire, but what turned it into a disaster wasn't just one man's carelessness. It was a perfect storm of conditions. London at the time was built largely of wood, with narrow, winding streets and overhanging houses that trapped heat. A long dry summer had made everything tinder dry. Strong winds swept through the city, fanning flames into walls, roofs, and churches. There were no fire departments, no water hoses, just bucket brigades. And instead of stopping the fire early, the Lord Mayor reportedly said, a woman might piss it out. That delay proved fatal. But here's another twist. No one died directly in the fire, at least according to official records. Over 13,000 homes were destroyed, but most people escaped. Later studies suggest many poor and unrecorded deaths may have gone unnoticed, but it remains a strange historical detail. So yes, a bakery sparked the fire, but blaming it all on a loaf of bread ignores the larger truth. The fire was a tragedy of infrastructure, leadership, and timing, not just a baking accident. Sometimes history isn't about one spark, it's about the fuel that was already waiting. Reading in the dark will ruin your eyes. You're curled up with a book, the light is dim, and someone says it. Benign would turn on a lamp. You'll ruin your eyes. Reading in the dark. It's advice passed down through generations. Logical, protective. But here's the truth. Reading in low light doesn't cause permanent eye damage. Your eyes might feel tired, sore, or even dry after reading in the dark, but that's called eye strain, and it's temporary. Once you rest your eyes, or return to better lighting, your vision returns to normal. Here's what's really happening. In low light, your eyes work harder to focus, your pupils dilate to let in more light, and your eye muscles stay tensed to maintain clarity. Over time, that can cause fatigue. Just like holding any muscle for too long, you might blink less often too, which leads to dryness. But nothing is physically harmed. Your retina isn't burning out. Your lenses aren't degrading. You're just giving your eye muscles a bit of a workout. This myth likely dates back to older times, when books were read by candlelight and poor lighting made reading genuinely uncomfortable, especially for people already struggling with vision. But the discomfort led to a myth that temporary strain equals permanent damage. Modern studies and ophthalmologists agree. Dim light won't wreck your vision, but it can cause short-term symptoms like headaches or blurred vision that make reading less enjoyable. So if you love reading at night, go ahead. Use a lamp for comfort, not because your eyesight is in danger, because the real harm comes not from the dark, but from being told you can't enjoy it. Owls can turn their heads all the way around. It's one of the most iconic animal facts people love to repeat. Owls can turn their heads in a full circle, 360 degrees. It sounds almost supernatural, a bird with exorcist-level flexibility. But here's the reality. Owls can't spin their heads all the way around, but what they can do is still impressive. An owl can rotate its head about 270 degrees in either direction. That means it can look almost completely backward over its shoulder, plus a little more. But not a full 360, not without breaking its neck. So how do they do it? It starts with special bone structure. Owls have 14 vertebrae in their necks, twice as many as humans. That extra length gives them a wide range of motion. But more importantly, owls have adapted their circulatory system to handle the twist. In most animals, turning the head too far would cut off blood flow to the brain. But owls have backup arteries and wider channels that keep blood moving, even when the neck is twisted dramatically. Their blood vessels are designed to stretch and flex, reducing the risk of injury. And why do they need this ability? Owls have immobile eyes. Their large, forward-facing eyes are fixed in their sockets, meaning they can't shift their gaze like humans can. To compensate, they move their heads instead, and they're incredibly quiet and precise about it. So the myth is close, but not quite. They don't spin like tops. They just pivot better than almost any animal alive. The truth isn't less magical. It's just more anatomically brilliant. Humans didn't live with dinosaurs. It's a scene imagined by movies, cartoons, and even toys. Cavemen running from tigri, rituals, humans riding triceratops. A prehistoric world where people and dinosaurs shared the same turf. But here's the truth. Humans and non-avian dinosaurs never coexisted. Not even close. Dinosaurs went extinct about 66 million years ago, wiped out by a mass extinction event, most likely a massive asteroid impact, near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The only dinosaurs that survived were the avian ones, in other words, birds. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, didn't appear until around 300,000 years ago. That's a gap of over 65 million years between the last dinosaur and the first human. To put that in perspective, there's a shorter time gap between you and T-Rex than there is between T-Rex and Stegosaurus. Dinosaurs themselves were around for so long that entire species came and went before others even appeared. So why do people imagine them together? Pop culture is the biggest reason. The Flintstones, theme parks, toys that throw cavemen and raptors into the same sandbox. It's exciting, dramatic, and visually memorable, but scientifically false. Early humans did live with giant prehistoric mammals like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats. But by then, the age of dinosaurs was already ancient history. So no, humans never dodged a velociraptor in real life. The only dinosaurs we live with now are birds, and even they probably don't want to share a timeline with us. You can't get pregnant during your period. It's one of those myths people whisper like a loophole. Don't worry, you can't get pregnant if it's during your period. But here's the truth. Getting pregnant during your period is unlikely, but it's definitely possible. Most people assume that menstruation is a biological safe zone, but the menstrual cycle is not a one-size-fits-all system. Sperm can live inside the female body for up to 5 days. An ovulation, the release of an egg, doesn't always happen on the same day each cycle. If someone has a short cycle, say 21 or 22 days, instead of the typical 28, they could ovulate just a few days after their period ends. If they have sex toward the end of their period, and sperm survive inside the body, they can still be present when ovulation happens. In rare cases, some people even experience irregular bleeding during ovulation and mistake it for a period, which can be especially confusing. And for people with irregular cycles, tracking fertile windows becomes even more unpredictable. So while the odds of getting pregnant during your period are lower, they're not zero. It's not a free pass. The myth persists because of a general misunderstanding of reproductive timing, and because people like to believe in natural safety zones rather than the messy complexity of biology. If avoiding pregnancy is the goal, relying on the calendar alone is risky. Real birth control is a better plan than wishful thinking, because biology doesn't follow myths, it follows its own timeline. GPS always shows the fastest route. You tap, start, the map loads, and your GPS voice confidently tells you the way. Estimated arrival time, calculated route. Optimized, or so it seems. But here's the truth. GPS doesn't always show the fastest route. It shows the route that it thinks is fastest, based on limited and sometimes outdated information. GPS apps, like Google Maps or Waze, estimate travel time using a mix of historical data, real-time traffic reports, and user input. But they don't see everything. Accidents that just happened. Closed roads not yet reported. Weather conditions, construction zones, and even bad data from other drivers can all throw off its prediction. Sometimes, the app will route you through smaller roads or bizarre backstreets to shave off a few seconds, but in reality, those routes might be harder to navigate, slower in practice, or more stressful. In cities, GPS might underestimate traffic light delays or pedestrian zones. In rural areas, it might miss poorly maintained roads. In tunnels or mountains, GPS can even lose signal altogether and start guessing. And sometimes, the fastest route isn't the safest, simplest, or most fuel efficient. It's just the one with the best math based on what it knows, which isn't always everything. So while GPS is a powerful tool, it's not infallible. It's a guide, not a guarantee. Trust the map, but trust your eyes more. And never forget, even satellites can be wrong sometimes. Sharks can smell a drop of blood from miles away. It's the stuff of ocean legends and horror movies. A single drop of blood in the water, and a shark miles away turns and charges. But here's the truth. Sharks have an excellent sense of smell, but not supernatural. The myth that sharks can smell a drop of blood from miles away is an exaggeration. In reality, sharks can detect tiny concentrations of certain chemicals in water, including blood, but only within a limited range, usually hundreds of meters, not miles. Sharks have highly sensitive nostrils that can pick up parts per billion of substances in the water. That's impressive. But the ocean is vast, and currents disperse smells in unpredictable ways. A single drop of blood would dilute almost instantly, especially in moving water. The distance at which a shark can detect blood depends on factors like water temperature, currents, type of blood, and even the species of shark. Some are better sniffers than others, but none have the ability to zero in from miles away, like a guided missile. The myth likely spread because it plays into our primal fears that the ocean is full of hidden predators, just waiting for a trace of weakness. Movies like Jaws amplified that fear, and once the myth entered pop culture, it stuck. In truth, sharks aren't mindless hunters. They're cautious, sensitive animals that often ignore humans altogether. Yes, they can detect blood, but they don't automatically attack. And no, your paper cut in the ocean won't summon a feeding frenzy from the deep. The science is fascinating, but the fear, mostly fiction. You lose all muscle. If you stop working out for a week, you've been training hard, making progress, feeling stronger. Then, life happens. Work, travel, illness, and you skip the gym for a week. Suddenly, a voice creeps in. You're losing all your gains. But here's the truth. You don't lose muscle after just 1 week without training. Muscle isn't that fragile. In fact, taking a short break, known as a deload week, can actually help your body recover and grow stronger. Studies show that muscle mass and strength remain mostly unchanged for at least 1 to 2 weeks of rest, especially if you've been training consistently. Your muscles are built from long-term patterns, not one missed session. What does change quickly is how your body feels. After a few days, you might feel less pumped or a little sluggish. That's because of a temporary drop in muscle glycogen, water retention, and blood flow, not a loss of muscle fibers. If inactivity continues for several weeks, especially with no physical movement at all, then muscle atrophy, slow shrinking, can begin. But even then, the process is gradual. It's not like your body deletes your progress overnight. And here's the good news. Muscle memory is real. Once you've built muscle, your body remembers how to rebuild it faster the next time, thanks to changes at the cellular level. So no, skipping a week won't undo months of effort. Your strength is more resilient than you think. Guilt doesn't build muscle, rest does too. The Sahara Desert has always been a desert. When you think of the Sahara, you picture endless sand dunes, blistering heat, and dry, empty silence. It feels eternal, like it's always been that way. But here's the truth. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. It was once green, wet, and full of life. Around 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, the Sahara was part of a vast region called the African Humid Period. It had lakes, rivers, grasslands, and even forests in some parts. People lived there, farmed, fished, and painted rock art, showing animals like giraffes, crocodiles, and hippos, species that can't survive in desert conditions today. So what happened? The Earth's tilt and orbit shifted over time, subtly changing seasonal rainfall patterns. These small astronomical changes, called Milankovitch cycles, triggered a slow drying of the region. Vegetation disappeared, soil turned to sand, and over thousands of years, the Sahara transformed from a lush savanna into the massive desert we know now. Satellite imaging has even revealed ancient riverbeds and buried lakes beneath the sand, confirming that this arid landscape hides a very different past. And here's the twist. This cycle may not be permanent. Some scientists believe that, thousands of years from now, the Sahara could turn green again, depending on Earth's long-term orbital changes. So no, the Sahara isn't an eternal desert. It's part of Earth's living, breathing history. A reminder that even the most unchanging places are shaped by time, tilt, and transformation. Coffee stunts your growth. It's a warning many kids hear when they reach for their first cup of coffee. Don't drink that. It'll stunt your growth. It sounds like responsible advice. After all, caffeine is a stimulant, and kids are still growing. But here's the truth. There's no scientific evidence that coffee stunts growth. The origin of the myth likely comes from old concerns about bone health. Decades ago, some studies suggested that caffeine might reduce calcium absorption, which led people to believe it could weaken bones and interfere with growth. But those studies didn't account for one simple fact. Most people weren't getting enough calcium in the first place. Later research clarified that moderate caffeine intake doesn't significantly impact bone density, especially when calcium intake is sufficient. If you're drinking coffee and getting enough calcium from diet or supplements, there's no cause for concern. So why does the myth persist? Partly because coffee is associated with adulthood, late nights, work, stress. Parents may use the growth warning as a way to discourage kids from adopting adult habits too early, and partly because caffeine does affect the body. It can cause jitteriness, disrupt sleep, and increase heart rate in sensitive individuals. But those are short-term effects. They don't change your DNA, they don't shrink your bones, and they don't stop you from growing. Growth is determined by genetics, hormones, nutrition, and overall health, not by what's in your morning mug. So no, coffee won't turn you into a short version of yourself, but it might turn you into a slightly more alert one. The equator is the hottest place on Earth. It sounds perfectly logical. The equator gets the most direct sunlight year-round, so it must be the hottest place on Earth. But here's the surprise. The equator isn't the hottest place on Earth, not even close. While it's true that the equator receives consistent solar exposure, the hottest temperatures ever recorded actually come from places much farther north, in desert regions, not tropical ones. Take Death Valley, California, for example. It holds the record for the highest reliably recorded air temperature, 56.7 degrees Celsius, or 134 degrees Fahrenheit, measured in 1913. Other scorching places include Kuwait, Iran, and Libya, all well above the equator. Why? Because the world's hottest regions combine intense sunlight with specific geography. Deserts have dry air, clear skies, and minimal vegetation. That means there's nothing to block or absorb the sun's energy, and nothing to retain moisture to cool the air. Meanwhile, the equator, especially in places like the Amazon or Congo, is hot, yes, but also humid, forested, and cloudy. These conditions regulate temperature and keep it from reaching the extremes seen in drier, more open landscapes. The equator is consistent, but the world's hottest spots are more about dry air, sun angles, and barren ground than latitude alone. So, while the equator is warm year-round, the crown for hottest place goes to the dry giants of the northern deserts, not the rainforest. Humans have more bacteria than human cells. For years, the claim echoed through science headlines and health documentaries. You're more bacteria than human. The idea was shocking, a little gross, and kind of fascinating. But here's the truth. The numbers are closer to equal, and the myth came from a miscalculation. The original claim suggested that for every one human cell, there were 10 bacterial cells living in and on your body. That would mean you were only 10% human, biologically speaking. But more recent and detailed research corrected the math. A 2016 study published in Cell estimated that the average adult has about 30 trillion human cells and 39 trillion bacterial cells, much closer to a 1-to-1 ratio. So while you still carry a massive microbial population, you're not outnumbered 10-to-1. You're more like 50-50. Most of these bacteria live in your gut, especially in the large intestine. But you also have thriving bacterial colonies on your skin, in your mouth, and even in your nose. This ecosystem is called the microbiome, and it plays an essential role in digestion, immunity, and even mood. And while the myth exaggerated the numbers, it got one thing right. These bacteria matter. They're not freeloaders. They're part of your internal support system. So yes, you're full of bacteria, and that's a good thing. Just don't believe you're only 10% human. You're more human than that, but your bacteria still deserve credit. Lemmings commit mass suicide. It's one of the most persistent animal myths in modern culture. Lemmings follow each other off cliffs in a frenzy, committing mass suicide. It's been used as a metaphor for blind conformity and foolish group behavior. But here's the truth. Lemmings don't commit suicide. The myth was staged. Literally, lemmings are small, Arctic rodents that experience population booms and crashes. When their numbers get too high, they migrate to find new territory. During these migrations, some may accidentally drown trying to cross rivers or lakes, but they're not throwing themselves off cliffs with a death wish. So, where did this bizarre idea come from? A big source of the myth came from a 1958 Disney documentary called White Wilderness. In the film, lemmings were shown dramatically plunging off a cliff into water, but behind the scenes, the filmmakers staged the entire scene, reportedly using a rotating platform and even physically pushing the animals off the edge to get the shot. The footage shocked audiences and cemented the image of suicidal lemmings into pop culture. But biologists and ecologists have long debunked the behavior. Lemmings aren't irrational. They don't follow the crowd to their deaths. Like many animals, they migrate under pressure and sometimes pay the price when the landscape turns dangerous. The real tragedy isn't in the animal's instincts. It's in how easily humans turned a misunderstanding and a manipulated film scene into a global myth. Lemmings don't leap to die, they move to survive. Microwave radiation makes your food radioactive. You put leftovers in the microwave, and someone says it. These are microwaves. Change your food at the atomic level. It's basically radioactive now. But here's the truth. Microwaving food does not make it radioactive at all. Microwave ovens use a specific type of non-ionizing radiation, which is completely different from the ionizing radiation associated with nuclear material or X-rays. Ionizing radiation has enough energy to knock electrons off atoms, potentially damaging DNA and creating radiation hazards. Microwaves don't do that. Instead, they work by causing water molecules in food to vibrate rapidly, producing heat through friction. That heat cooks the food. The microwave energy itself doesn't stay in the food, and it doesn't alter the atoms in a way that creates radioactivity. It's like rubbing your hands together to warm them up. You're creating heat, not radiation. The confusion likely comes from the word radiation itself, which tends to set off alarm bells. But not all radiation is dangerous. Even visible light is a form of radiation. So is the heat you feel from a fireplace. Microwave radiation just happens to be in the frequency range that's perfect for heating food efficiently. So what's the actual risk? Not much, unless you overheat or improperly reheat certain foods, which can lead to uneven cooking or nutrient loss. But none of that has to do with radiation in the dangerous sense. So the next time someone says your food is radioactive because you used a microwave, you can remind them. It's warm, not glowing, cooked, not contaminated. A coin dropped on train tracks can derail a train. It's the kind of myth you hear on school playgrounds and dramatic YouTube videos. If you put a coin on the tracks, it can derail a train. It sounds dangerous, reckless, possibly criminal. But here's the truth. A coin on the tracks won't derail a train. Not even close. Trains are incredibly heavy. A single freight train can weigh over 10,000 tons. The steel wheels and tracks are engineered to handle that immense pressure. A coin, which weighs just a few grams, is no match. When a train rolls over it, the coin is usually flattened or flung off, barely making a dent in the process. The idea that such a small object could throw a multi-ton machine off its tracks is pure fiction. The wheel-to-rail contact is wide, stable, and supported by thousands of pounds of downward force. A coin can't alter that contact in any meaningful way. So where did the myth come from? Probably from a mix of safety warnings, movie exaggerations, and the general mystery surrounding train systems. People knew placing objects on tracks was dangerous, so the myth became a kind of cautionary tale, one that added drama to a real warning. And let's be clear, putting anything on a train track is illegal and dangerous, not because it'll derail a train, but because it puts people at risk, especially if someone tries to retrieve it. So while a coin won't cause a train wreck, the real danger isn't physics, it's human behavior. The myth is derailed, but the law still stands. Eating at night makes you gain more weight. It's a rule you've probably heard in every diet article or fitness blog. Don't eat after 8 p.m. Your body will store it all as fat. But here's the truth. Eating at night doesn't automatically make you gain weight. Total intake matters more than timing. The myth comes from the idea that your metabolism slows down at night, so food eaten late is more likely to be stored. But metabolism doesn't suddenly shut off when the sun goes down. Your body continues to burn energy, even while you sleep. What really causes weight gain is eating more calories than you burn. regardless of when those calories are consumed. That said, when you eat can still affect how you eat. Late-night eating is often mindless or emotional, snacking in front of a screen, eating out of boredom or stress, and choosing calorie-dense comfort foods. If those habits lead to overeating, then yes, weight gain might follow, but it's the behavior, not the clock, that's to blame. Shift workers and people with different schedules can still lose weight or stay healthy while eating at night, as long as the overall diet is balanced and portion controlled. So don't fear the clock, fear the habit. Vitamin C prevents colds completely. It's one of the most trusted health tips out there. Feeling a sore throat coming on? Take some vitamin C, it'll stop the cold in its tracks. But here's the truth. Vitamin C doesn't prevent colds. At best, it might slightly reduce their duration. The myth began with good intentions, and a Nobel Prize winner. In the 1970s, scientist Linus Pauling promoted high doses of vitamin C as a cure-all, especially for the common cold. The media ran with it, supplement companies capitalized on it, and decades later, people still swear by it. But the science tells a different story. Dozens of clinical studies have examined vitamin C and its effects on the common cold. The conclusion: for most people, taking vitamin C regularly does not prevent colds. It might shorten the duration of a cold by about 8%, less than a single day, and slightly reduce symptom severity. But starting vitamin C after you feel sick? No significant benefit there. The only group that seems to get real protection: people under extreme physical stress, like marathon runners, skiers, or soldiers in sub-zero conditions. For them, regular vitamin C supplementation might cut cold risk in half, but for everyone else, it's not a shield. It's more like a soft pillow. It won't stop the cold, but it might make the ride a little smoother. So if you like your orange juice or your supplements, go ahead. Just don't expect them to make you invincible. You can see the northern lights from anywhere in the north. You're traveling up north, somewhere cold and remote. And someone says with excitement, you'll definitely see the northern lights up here. But here's the truth. Being far north doesn't guarantee you'll see the aurora borealis. The northern lights are a natural phenomenon caused by charged solar particles colliding with Earth's magnetic field. These particles interact with gases in the upper atmosphere, releasing energy in the form of dancing lights across the sky. But despite being more common in high latitudes, the aurora isn't visible from everywhere in the north, and not every night. To see them clearly, you need a few conditions to line up. First, proximity to the magnetic pole matters more than just being north. That's why countries like Iceland, northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and parts of Canada offer prime viewing. They sit directly beneath the auroral oval, where activity is strongest. Second, clear, dark skies. Light pollution from cities or cloud cover will hide even a strong aurora. Many northern towns never see the lights, simply because they're too bright or too foggy. Third, solar activity. The sun doesn't send particles at a constant rate. Stronger geomagnetic storms, caused by solar flares or coronal mass ejections, increase aurora visibility. On quiet nights, even in the Arctic Circle, the sky might stay dark. So while being north gives you a better shot, it's not a guarantee. The aurora is a moving target, beautiful, unpredictable, and never promised. You don't just go north to see it. You go with patience, timing, and a little luck. The color white reflects all heat. It's one of those facts that feels obvious. Where white in the sun, it reflects all the heat. That's why we wear light-colored clothes in summer, and why buildings in hot climates are painted white. But here's the truth. White reflects visible light, not all heat. Let's break that down. Heat comes in different forms. Visible light, which white reflects, is part of the energy we get from the sun. But infrared radiation, another form of heat, behaves differently. Many materials, even if they appear white, can still absorb infrared and get hot under the sun. In fact, Certain white fabrics and surfaces may reflect visible light, but trap infrared heat, especially if they're synthetic. That's why two white shirts can feel totally different in the same sun. One keeps you cool, the other feels like an oven. And here's another twist. Airflow matters more than color. A loose black shirt with good ventilation can keep you cooler than a tight white shirt that traps sweat and heat. Desert nomads, for example, often wear black robes, not because they reflect sunlight, but because they create airflow currents between the fabric and the skin that help with cooling. It's not about color alone, it's about how the material handles heat and how your body exchanges it. So yes, white reflects light, but that doesn't make it a magical heat shield. Real cooling depends on fabric, airflow, and radiation, not just your color palette. The sun is smarter than that. Dogs sweat by panting alone. You see a dog panting on a hot day, tongue out, breathing fast, and you think, that's how they sweat. Dogs don't have sweat glands like we do. But here's the truth. Panting isn't the only way dogs cool down. And yes, they do sweat, just not where you expect. Unlike humans, dogs don't have sweat glands all over their bodies, but they do have them, mainly in their paws and nose. You might notice damp paw prints on a tile floor during a hot afternoon. That's not from water, it's sweat, released through the pads of their feet. It's not enough to regulate body temperature alone, but it's there. So what about panting? Panting is a dog's primary cooling system. When they pant, moisture evaporates from their tongue, mouth, and upper respiratory tract. That evaporation carries heat away, just like sweat does in humans. It's efficient, fast, and requires no effort beyond breathing. But dogs also rely on behavior to cool off. They seek shade, lie on cool surfaces, drink water, and avoid exertion. Their fur can even act as insulation, shielding them from extreme temperatures, both hot and cold. So while it's true that dogs pant to cool down, it's not the whole story. They sweat, they adjust, they manage heat in more ways than we give them credit for. Panting is just the loudest way they say, "It's hot out here." Earth's gravity comes from the core. It seems logical, even scientific. Earth's gravity comes from its core, the heavy, molten center pulling everything down. But here's the truth. Gravity doesn't come from the core. It comes from the entire mass of the planet. Gravity is a property of mass. Any object with mass exerts gravitational force, including you, me, a mountain, or a planet. The strength of that force depends on how much mass there is and how far away it is. So yes, Earth's core is extremely dense, but gravity isn't generated there like electricity from a power plant. Instead, every part of Earth contributes to gravity, from the crust to the mantle to the outer and inner core. And here's a counterintuitive twist. If you were able to travel down into the Earth, gravity would actually get weaker the deeper you go. That's because the mass above you would start pulling in opposite directions, cancelling out some of the downward force. At the very center of the Earth, the exact middle of the core, gravity would be zero. You'd be weightless, pulled equally in all directions by the surrounding mass. So gravity doesn't come from the center. It comes from mass and how it's distributed. The reason we feel it pulling us down is because Earth is big and we're standing on the outside of its massive surface. That's where all the weight stacks up. So the next time someone says gravity comes from the core, you can tell them it comes from everywhere. The whole Earth is pulling you in. Black holes suck everything like a vacuum cleaner. Say the words black hole, and most people picture the same thing. A swirling void in space that sucks up everything nearby, like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. But here's the truth. Black holes don't suck. They pull, just like any other object with mass. A black hole is simply a region of space where gravity is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape once it gets too close. But from a distance, a black hole behaves just like any other object of the same mass. If our sun was suddenly replaced by a black hole of equal mass, without exploding, Earth wouldn't get pulled in. Our orbit would remain the same. We just lose sunlight. The reason black holes get their dramatic reputation is because of their event horizon, the point of no return. If something crosses that boundary, it can't come back. But that only happens if an object gets very, very close. The gravitational pull increases sharply near the edge, but outside that, it's just gravity. They're not roaming space-eating stars at random. In fact, many black holes are surrounded by stable systems, stars, gas clouds, even entire galaxies that orbit them for billions of years without falling in. So black holes are powerful, mysterious, and extreme, but they're not vacuums. They don't hunt, they don't suck, they just sit and pull, like gravity always does. Lightning only strikes the tallest object. It's storming. You see lightning, and someone says, "Don't stand near tall trees." Lightning always strikes the tallest thing around. It sounds like solid advice, but here's the truth. Lightning doesn't always strike the tallest object. It strikes the easiest path to the ground. Yes, tall objects are often hit, but not because of height alone. Lightning follows the path of least electrical resistance, not just the highest point. That path depends on many things. Moisture in the air, the shape of the terrain, the conductivity of nearby materials, even what you're standing on. That's why lightning can strike a golf course, a beach, or a flat open field, places with nothing towering nearby. And it's why people have been hit while hiking, swimming, or even standing under low trees. Lightning can also strike multiple times in the same place and hit objects that aren't the highest, but happen to be better conductors. So yes, height matters, but it's not the whole story. In a lightning storm, it's not about what's tallest, it's about what connects the fastest. Because lightning isn't just reaching down, it's meeting something that's already reaching up. Evolution has a final goal. We often talk about evolution like it's a journey, one with progress, purpose, and a final destination, like humans were the intended outcome all along. But here's the truth. Evolution has no final goal, no finish line, no grand design. Evolution is simply change over time, shaped by natural selection and random mutation. Organisms don't evolve towards something better. They evolve traits that help them survive and reproduce in the environment they're in. Sometimes that means becoming faster or smarter. Sometimes it means becoming smaller, simpler, or even losing traits entirely, like blind cave fish, or parasites that shed complex systems to survive more efficiently.
There's no ladder.
No upgrade path. And humans, we're not the pinnacle, we're just one branch in an ever-splitting tree. Successful for now, but just as temporary as any species before us. The myth of progress comes from anthropocentrism, the belief that evolution was always leading to us. But nature doesn't plan. It adapts. So no, evolution doesn't have a final goal. It just keeps moving, blind, reactive, and endlessly creative. The brain is most active during waking hours. You wake up, get moving, and your brain turns on. That's how it feels. So we assume the brain is most active when we're awake, working, talking, thinking. But here's the truth. Your brain is often more active when you're asleep. That sounds impossible, but studies show that during REM sleep, the stage when dreams occur, the brain's electrical activity can match or even exceed waking levels. Why? Because sleep isn't rest for the brain. It's maintenance mode, where memories are consolidated, emotions are processed, toxins are cleared, and learning is reinforced. The default mode network, a system involved in reflection and imagination, lights up during sleep and rest periods. In fact, some regions of the brain are more active during REM sleep than when you're fully awake, especially those related to emotion, memory, and visual imagery. So the idea that your brain wakes up when you do, it's a myth. Your brain never sleeps. It just switches jobs, from reacting to the world to rebuilding itself for the next day. The real mystery isn't how active the brain is when you're awake. It's how hard it works when you're not even aware.